Hey, Daniel.
Hey,
Well, we're cutting for sign number um
45.
we are on a number and it's above 40 and below 50.
It's 45, but it's actually 46 because of the prologue.
All right.
So,
Yeah.
and we're going to try something new today.
Okay.
You're not going to talk. I'm going to say everything. Observe and take notes.
Finally.
Finally.
Finally. Hold on a second.
Touche. Nice.
I'm ready.
No, we're gonna each take a minute or two to say what cutting for sign is and what it means to us. What do you think? What's this podcast about?
Yeah, cutting for sign is an old phrase, an old archaic phrase meaning to search for the thing that you are hunting in particular. And for me, that's a metaphor for how we find our way in life. And there's risk, and there is nuance, and there is adventure, and sometimes you need a break, right? Like sometimes you need help. And that phrase has always been in my mind. I remember hearing as a child from my dad somehow, and it's lived with me for a long time.
Huh.
Yeah. So that's what it means to me.
You heard it as a child.
Yeah, I did. My dad was kind of obsessed with weird, like he was obsessed with mountain man lore.
Oh.
And he was a mountain man reenactor. And we would go to these, what they call rendezvous, which are these camps where everyone is dressed in clothes that are made to look like they were made before the year 1840.
Yeah.
And we would throw tomahawks and knives and cook out of like cast iron shit and shoot black powder rifles and dress in leather and all that stuff. Sleep in teepees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where you got the thing. That's cool. Okay. Okay.
What does it mean for you?
I feel like it means more to that too, but we're just getting warmed up because it's changed. It's changed for me.
Yeah.
And I love telling people about this podcast and what it's called and the name of it and why the name is the name. And it has grown for me. It started out with, well, we like to read signs in the world and find our way through life. And it's a metaphor because that means cutting for sign is sign that has been left by an animal or a human. And when you cut that sign, you're noticing what it is, you delineate what it means, and then you follow it. And that's like a metaphor for reading the signs of life. But then it became the actual signs of life that I cut started to come through this podcast a lot. Like it started to be a very meaningful thing.
Like what?
Well, like Tracy Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she sent
me that.
Episode. Yeah. She sent us that little thing about the feminine journey. You know, some more the masculine hero's journey, and then there was the feminine journey.
Yeah,
and that was very meaningful to me. So that conversation started to be meaningful in and of itself, as opposed to be a conversation about meaningful things, or about how to read meaningful things.
Right.
And then
or what might be meaningful. Or what we give meaning to.
Seriously, we're gonna get into it today.
I know.
I get a good tingle in the I don't know, some part of my body. Sorry, that one went off the rails. But then,
so bad I can't even make fun of you. I was gonna make fun of you, and I couldn't even.
I beat you to it.
Couldn't do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
They call that point of origin check.
Yeah.
And then it became cutting for sign. What is it? Something that I say now is that cutting for sign, it is that original meaning, but the thing that you and I are pursuing, the animal, is a more developed, better, more authentic, more attuned, more aligned version of ourselves, or an experience of life.
I like that.
And I know it's a little cheesy.
No, it's not. I mean, look, dude. If you squeeze any metaphor, you will end up with kind of a
gushy nasty bullshit.
Well, I don't know. You get to the soft, chewy center for sure.
I think that I was listening to David's book.
Yeah,
and he was talking about how he said a Zen monk, a Buddhist monk, a monk can meditate their whole lives, and they will just scratch the surface of the subconscious.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
I thought that was very cool because the subconscious theoretically is bottomless,
Right.
and so I think that when in the parlance of the self-help world, be your best self. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's possible. Let's just be on the path. As long as I
Yeah.
know I'm tracking the animal, I am
Version of
closer all
you.
the yeah. I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Am I gonna suddenly be my best self? Never, fucking never. It doesn't even make any sense.
Hmm.
You know.
Hmm.
I guess you could reframe it. What do you think about
Yeah.
that?
I mean, I don't. I guess I've never thought about what my best self looks like.
What?
Yeah. I mean, look, dude. Like my whole life is about becoming a better version of myself, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not even the question. I guess I've never painted like a final thing because I've always thought, kind of what you're saying now is like I'll never be perfect. Like
Yeah.
I've got some very lofty aspirations that I'd love to connect to, but I think at the end of the day, when I die, like I want you know, the things I want the most are to know that my family knows beyond anything that I love them, and that I love myself well enough that I didn't leave any stone unturned in my journey.
That's deathbed thoughts,
Yeah,
goals.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now we're talking. It was the second time. Like we were just sharing a story, a little adventure that I went on, and I was like, you were like, proceed with caution, and I was like,
Oh,
hey
yeah.
man, I need to say yes to this adventure because this is what I'm here for. And when I said that, I was like, ooh, I meant that.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
mm,
And I find myself saying things like that more often these days, and I think that that's being more attuned, more aligned. And I
mm-hmm.
think that instead of let's be our best self, let's find our best self. It's just let me attune, let me align increasingly more.
Yeah,
Let's just get maybe fuck it. Let's just be better always. That's fine. Always
yeah.
satisfied, never happy. You know what I mean? Always happy, never satisfied. Whatever.
I know what you mean. I get what you're trying to say. I'm kind of excited about the idea of hunting myself.
I like it too.
Like that's an interesting.
Yeah.
That's like there's some layers to that.
That's
That's
what it's come for me. It's
There's
and I
some
and I'm like, what the
meta-ness to that one.
yeah, and it's like, ooh, what the I'd
Yeah,
probably never find it, but I'm gonna get closer and the signs are gonna get more interesting, intriguing,
yeah,
and maybe you confront yourself on your deathbed the moment you die. Maybe that's when you find the animal and our whole life is spent tracking. I'm cool with that. Cutting for sign till the day I die. I'm cool.
I do like one thing that this has brought up in my life is that, and we'll get into this with Dave. Is like I find the small little details that inspire me to take my next right step so meaningful. And when they
Yeah.
stack up, like when it's like
Yes.
one thing after another and after another, like I actually, it's kind of like we've just started to say, man, today was like very cutting for sign. Like it
Mm.
was, and I appreciate that you and I say that. I hope at some point someone else out there
It's happened.
really,
Oh fuck yeah. There was there's been a couple times where someone has used the cutting for sign in conversation with me because of our podcast. It's
yes,
you knocked it out of the park
yes.
with that name.
Oh
I
man.
love the name dearly. How often does someone do that? Hey, what am I going to title this book? Hey, what am I going to name this kid?
Yeah.
What are we going to name this podcast? And then you were like, one day passed. We batted around some shitty ideas, and you were like, cutting for sign. I was like, you just named the podcast like for in propriety,
Yeah.
for perpetuity. It's
We need
done.
we need a brick and mortar building with it, don't we?
We need one of those Joe Rogan signs behind us. It's like
Oh yeah.
however cutting sign would be, but it's a great name, man, and
Thank
it's
you.
catching on.
Yeah.
In
I'm glad to
other
hear that.
people are finding it useful that aren't even as nearly as invested as we are.
Um, this is a side story. I just think it's fun. But about catching yourself. I live on the fourth floor of this apartment building.
Yeah,
And from the street you can see our living room. You can kind of see where we live. And the whole family and I were walking back one night. It was around Halloween of last year. And we were trying to tell spooky stories and just be a little spooky together. And I go, guys, look up there. And my whole family looks up. I said, did you see us? Did you see us all up there looking back on us? And it creeped the hell out of the kids.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That was a little like bendy moment.
Yeah.
Good job.
That happened to me actually the other night. I was at a concert.
You saw yourself.
Dude, I did. And it freaked the fuck out of
For
me
a doppelganger?
for
Someone that
about
looked like
20 seconds. Rick Maderis. He met me for a concert and he's standing a few feet from me. We had Rick on an earlier episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had he had an
Wow.
outfit of mine on. And I
Oh.
was and
Whoa.
I wear his hat all the time, the
Oh.
Burnside Knives hat, and he
Oh.
had that on and a black mask. And I looked at him for 5 seconds, say 5 seconds, but it felt like a long fucking time of me, like my brain not knowing what to do with a mirror image not on a mirror.
I got another David McRaney reference for you then. In his book, he was talking about this thought experiment. Well, if you swap one atom of he was using Edward James Olmos.
Yeah.
And he'd say, for you, and he was like, if you keep swapping atoms, at what point in time is it like? And then he's like, at what? This is a pretty good joke. He was at some point in time, would you have an Edward James almost? I was like, okay, it's just like you got to do it.
You gotta do it. It's like with the low lying dick jokes. You gotta just
every once in a while,
Yeah.
it's an easy one.
I'm gonna Edward James. He was Stand and Deliver?
Don't know.
I think
Don't
he
have
was the
the-
teacher in Stand and Deliver.
Is he here? Can you tell that he's here?
He's not here.
Okay.
Edward James almost is not here. Nor is Mr. Rainey here.
Rainey is almost here. Yeah. That's cool. That's interesting. Weird shit like that. I can't wait to talk to David about meaningfulness.
Well, let's talk to him. Let's talk about him for a moment here.
Well,
Yeah.
what do you think? What opening thoughts?
Yeah. What drew me to him in particular is a guy who's more or less made a career out of asking, like, do I know what I really think I know? And does the human brain know what it really thinks it knows? And for me in my own life, like that's the question I've been asking for a long time, especially around the word deconstruction is a very popular word
Yes.
right now. I think he even has an episode called Deconstructing Yourself.
Awesome.
Yeah.
On his podcast?
On his podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah. I listened to an episode just this morning on anxiety, and we're going to get into some of that subconscious meddling that our brain likes to do, meddling. But I think you and I have said this, we may have even said it on here, but what's fascinating to me is when you question one thing, if you really are critical about one thing, the natural next step is to be critical about everything. Not criticism as far as like I think that's bad. I just mean you have to ask the bigger questions of everything in your life.
Yeah.
And that I think is often too scary for most people. And so they just don't. They would rather it be comfortable and life, it being life. They would rather just be comfortable and not have to carry too much existential weight, mental weight.
Yep.
Because then there's paradox. And if you're not prepared for paradox, it's gonna fuck you up.
Everybody out there, I mean, I usually wouldn't like say to do this, but I feel like holding opposites, ability to hold paradox is a next level human thing that we all just got to get on board with.
Everyone's got a plan until they get paradoxed.
Nice. Good turn on that one. Oh, can you get drive open?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Friend is here.
Hey, y'all.
Hey,
all
how
right.
are you,
Hi.
sir?
Yeah.
Dude, we're making it happen. I appreciate your sound dampening blanket.
Yeah.
And
That's great. It also is good for like covering up whenever you haven't cleaned up the room.
I mean, if you could
so-
see
Nice.
the life around the frame of where I'm at, you would. It's all good. Yeah, we're among company. You're among good company.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, just tell me if I can help you guys in any way, make this better. So, but I've got the laptop open and we have mood lighting all around.
You
All
know,
good.
we're working out how to make ours look good and sound good every episode, every month. We learn something, pick something up. So we're not highly critical at this stage of where we're at. But, so just to be honest, I don't know. Are you noticing anything?
I mean, the other word I was going to say is competent.
Competent.
We are. We're. It's a spectrum, but we're competent.
We're on the spectrum of competence.
That's good. I'm going to say that from now on wherever I go. I'm on a certain I'm somewhere on a spectrum of confidence. We'll figure out where before this conversation is through.
That's right.
Wow,
That's right.
we've added to your like lexicon of phrases.
I'm
Done.
honored.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we'll
I'm
just check
honored.
the box of
Yeah.
successful podcast. It's nice.
I'm like
to meet
one of
you,
those little
David.
crabs on the bottom of the ocean that it's like I'm always grabbing stuff and sticking it on myself from every conversation.
Just a little walking junkyard.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Great.
Okay, so Daniel's gonna read something to you. It's
okay.
kind of your introduction, and then you can.
All right, David McRaney, you are a science journalist and creator of the blog, podcast, and internationally best-selling book, You Are Not So Smart. You cut your teeth as a newspaper reporter in the American South, and since then have been an editor, photographer, voiceover artist, television host, journalism teacher, and tornado survivor. You produced The Green Couch Sessions, a TV show about the music of the Deep South, and you recently wrote, produced, and recorded a 6-hour audio documentary exploring the history of the idea and the word genius. Before all that, you did a little construction, sold some leather couches, leather coats, and owned 2 pet stores. Your recent work focuses on scientists who study the psychology of reasoning, decision-making, and self-delusion. Your second book, You Are Now Less Dumb, was released in 2013, and your third book, How Minds Change, comes out in 2022. How Minds Change explores why we believe, how to persuade, the limits of reasoning, the power of groupthink, and demonstrates the rare but transformative circumstances under which minds can change. You are known for a quick sense of humor, compassionate heart, keen curiosity, and have been described as a self-delusion expert and psychology nerd whose mind is expansive, surprising, and big-hearted. You believe in rising to the occasion of life with empathy, debunking personal delusions, and challenging your fellow humans to question their motives. Welcome, David McRaney.
Oh wow! I want to put that. I want to record that. I'm going to take this recording you just made of that introduction, and I'm going to every time I meet someone new, just press play on that.
Awesome. Yeah.
So nice to meet you both. I listened to one of your episodes and was delighted.
Did you?
I was like, oh, these dudes know what they're doing. Sometimes you get invited to something, you're like, oh yeah, this is just sort of one of those chit chat shows where they're gonna like lean back. But I enjoyed how engaged you were with your guests and the quality of the guests and the values that you present. It's really cool. So I like your work.
That means a lot, man.
I mean, it means I feel like we could say the exact same thing about you and appreciate all those kind words. And we've been excited.
Thanks so much.
We've been
big
like
time.
stoked and excited about getting this put together.
This conversation means something to us. I've been listening to one of your books. He's been listening to another one. We both, independent of each other, took in some of your content, and you're doing things that are very aligned and attuned with things that are close to our heart, our mind, and just our path in this life.
Cool.
And thank you for coming on here. We're really humbled. Curious, which episode did you listen to, or
here, let me pull it up. Let's see. It was Heather Roddy, Intuitive Soul Coach.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's
Awesome.
I would
cool.
not have guessed that. That's
Well,
cool.
now you know a little bit about my dirt, my religious.
I did. That was the best thing about it. Is I was like, oh, I got some dirt on these dudes now. So
yeah. I mean, the self delusion thing is basically my full time job. It's like trying to unwrap another layer of that within myself. My religious.
That's the best. That's the path. That is the path I hope everybody eventually finds themselves on at some point. So I'm glad you're there.
Do you? Yeah. Sorry. No. You're.
I mean, I feel like because of the internet in particular, the dissemination of wild information, is it hard in your expert mind? Do you think it's harder than ever to unwrap from delusion? Because we have so much access to like quick hit, like high hitting, endorphin producing information that makes us feel right and belong.
So this is going to be a weird answer. But first of all, I'm very optimistic, and I think that things are better than they've ever been in this regard, but they're more complicated than they've ever been in this regard at the same time. We used to have information gatekeepers for most of human history. So either you had the monk who came through your village and they're the one who could read and show you stuff, or you had a priest class who was telling you, what the truth of the universe was. And then once we had academies, then you had an academic class who they could be experts in specific things, and somebody else could make their food and stuff like that. So there's always been like these information gatekeepers who
Mm.
they were the ones who had these arguments. They were the ones who had these debates. They were the ones who were surrounded by too much information and were battling with each other over identity and in group, out group, and status and reputation, all that kind of stuff. And they're the ones who would get locked into ideologies. And then while everybody else, had to deal with uh, the practical part of being a person,
Mhm.
and they had no vested interest in anything except some political things that they also had no access to because there was a political class that kept them out of those debates.
Yeah.
So it's only been in the last
Huh.
few hundred years that there's been a democratic surge of information where people can there what and what's and then over the course of the last just 3 generations, the inclusion of people who have been excluded even from that, whether it's LGBT people or women or people of color, like this. It's incredible how we just have been we are just now all being pulled into this thing that has been promised since the Enlightenment. And once you get social media and smartphones and they're cheap and the internet is cheap and
Yeah.
it's accessible to everyone, what we're experiencing here in the last like 6 years, last
Yeah.
maybe decade, is
Yeah.
something completely new, which is everybody's part of the conversation. And if everybody's part of the conversation, then we're all going to argue the way that academics and philosophers used to argue. And a lot of times people aren't aware that these are arguments that people have already had, or these are sort
Yeah.
of debates that are ancient. And that's one of the things I love. I love to see on Reddit, on Facebook, on Twitter, people having philosophical arguments and they're not even aware of the genealogy of the argument that they're having. Like they're having an argument that people were having 2,000 years ago, but they're having it now anew as if it's fresh to them and they feel like it came just from them. And because we're all very similar when it comes to our brains and our reaction to the world around us.
Mm.
And that's what's happening is you have this fragmented, multidimensional epistemic chaos that has been introduced into the lives of for people who normally or who traditionally never had access to that sort of argument space. And we're just going to play it out. We're going to have to go through a few generations probably
Mm.
of weirdness, but everyone is slowly bootstrapping into a literacy and a familiarity with not just the technology, but the ideas and the argumentative frameworks that come out of being introduced to lots and lots of ideas.
Yeah.
So it's going to break a lot of stuff before
Mhm.
it settles,
Yeah.
and there's going to be something new on the other side of it, and that's the history of all technological upheaval. We just never have had this much access to each other's internal lives and opinions before,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like it's like the lapel camera effect, but like for ideas. You never there's a lot of the behavior we've seen from police that has risen to like the top of public consciousness is behavior that has been happening since there's been police. But now we're seeing it and having conversations about it.
Yeah.
The same thing is happening for just about anything. Like if a certain book comes out, it used to be only a very small handful of people would argue over the merits of that book. Now all of us are arguing over the merits of that book, even those of us who may not never read it. That's a new thing. And that and I so yeah, it's
Yeah.
wonky right now, especially if you have a particular value system or an idea or a political
Yeah.
stance or an identity that's being challenged.
Yeah.
Um, but on the other side of that, almost always it sorts itself out. Like brains are really good at being knocked into each other and arguing their way toward a better worldview that incorporates both sides, so you get a three-dimensional view of it instead of just this person's right or this person's right. What
And
usually is true
Huh.
is neither person is right or wrong. There's a third thing, a higher
Yeah.
truth or a deeper truth they need to get to.
and do you think that because these conversations are being exposed, that would cause them to be had more, and that's going to exponentially increase the progress we make through these conversations?
I think so. I really do. I mean, it's your mileage may vary because it's some things seem to happen very quickly and some things take longer, usually because there's vested interest, right? Usually
Yeah.
someone's money or prestige, reputation, position in society is being threatened. And then that's the thing that takes the argument has other motives behind it than the truth. Uh, we don't always pursue accuracy. In fact, we very rarely pursue accuracy as our number one motivation. Our number one motivation is almost always reputation management.
Mm.
And but we're very good at justifying and rationalizing our positions and our conclusions as if we're arguing for the truth. But usually what we're arguing for is our reputation amongst trusted peers.
Yeah.
And it takes a while for that to sort itself out. But I don't know if you've had this experience, um, like you get on Twitter and you get on the Facebook or any kind of social media and you start to write something out and then you get a little ways into it and go, this is stupid. Or you get a little ways into it and go, wait, I'm wrong. Because
Yeah.
because you're thinking about the
Yeah.
audience, right? You're thinking
Yeah.
about all the people who are, and you're already engaging in the argument as you're presenting the argument. You're
Yeah.
imagining how it's going to be torn apart, and sometimes that that makes you go, no, I'm not going to put this out there. That's happening at scale, right? That's happening across everyone who is presenting things out there, and that happens more often the more you are exposed to other people's reasoning, because oftentimes you will see on the sidelines, you'll see people having a debate over something that would you may have had a position on that issue um, prior to being a spectator to the argument that has been changed by the argument itself. And that's happening at scale across all of human experience right now, every continent.
I feel like that when we started this podcast, the reason for personally why I wanted to participate was to build articulation around all of these conversations that are going on. And there's something about it being recorded that puts just enough pressure, and knowing it's for posterity and we're not gonna delete things. It's gonna be out there. It just makes it it makes it matter enough for me, and it brings out a little bit better part of me. And not only I think a little better part as I work through it, but also the ground that I personally, and I think this is true for you too, Ron, make in these arguments by building that articulation, it sticks more because
Hmm.
we're gonna rep it out again with another person from another little bit of an angle. And
Hmm.
it's like I was kind of just a little my like scheme, but it fucking worked. Like
Yeah.
I feel better,
Holy shit, this has worked.
It's totally I was like, oh my gosh, I was right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really believe in this. In my new book, I spent a lot of time talking about, we evolved to the reason we uh, can change our minds is because we evolved to there's a group level um, selective pressure that's working on us. Right? There's a reason if we couldn't change our minds, we wouldn't be able to argue because there would be no point in it, right? The the idea is that uh, we we get to the truth by banging our heads together, and sometimes that truth is a culturally established truth, but sometimes it's a very hardcore epistemic, I mean not epistemic, empirical truth. um, I think one of the best examples of this for me is, if I can go on a slight tangent, is I love flat earthers. They're my favorite current group. um, for uh, for how minds change, I spent time with 9/11 truthers. I went to Westboro Baptist Church and went to
Wow.
their Valentine's Day services. I spent time with people in anti-vax communities before COVID was sort of what anti-vax meant, um, and all sorts of other communities. And it was with the flat earthers where things really kind of like flat earthers were a real gift because flat Earth is apolitical mostly, and it's not very. It's the stakes seem low there for the outsider who's looking into it. If we're talking about 9/11 truthers, you're going to get some of your conspiratorial thinking wrapped up in
Yeah,
that.
right.
If you're even with anti-vaxxers, there's going to be points that anti-vaxxers make that will resonate with people who consider themselves pro-science or something.
Yeah.
Flat Earther gets you a whole new place to talk about these ideas, right? Because most people are like, yo, there's not flat, right? Right? So how can this be? But there's a real example of what we were just talking about, right? These are arguments we already had. These are debates that we already had, but those were debates that were taking place
That's
in
a great example.
yes, perfect. These were debates that were taking place within a privileged
agree.
class of information gatekeepers.
Huh.
It was among priests, among scientists, among the academy, and then among astronomers. I mean, it wasn't just, you can go buy a telescope and start playing with astronomy right now, today on Amazon. It could be here in like, hopefully like even before Christmas.
Yeah.
If you're in, 1703, no, that's not going to be who's playing with the telescope, right? Like, at some point there were only like three telescopes. So the debates we were having the pool has spread. Well, there are people in our modern era who are using smartphones and have access to the internet and are driving cars that have computers inside them helping you determine how much gas is being injected into the fuel streams. Yet they're like, when I look at the horizon, it sure does look flat. And they have these anxieties about who is in control of everything. They have these they don't have a whole lot of trust in government. They don't have a whole lot of trust in doctors and institutions. They don't have a whole lot. They think of science as an institution, not a practice. And they imagine things like they think about things like the nuclear bomb experiments on like the Bikini Atoll and thing. There's all sorts of reasons to have these feelings. These are not totally unjustifiable feelings. And then they think of something as like NASA as a combination of all this. It's military, it's government, it's science, it's all these institutions. It evokes a lot of fear. And I'm sure you know all about confirmation bias, but I like to think of it as the sort of the goggles you put on when you have anxiety about something, when you have a negative affect, as they would say in psychology. So imagine you're in a tent and you hear a sound. It's late. You're camping in the woods and you hear a sound and you think that sounds like it could be a bad thing. And so you take out your flashlight and you go looking for confirmation that the anxieties that you're feeling are justified and they are plausible for your trusted peers, that other people would think that you were justified in going to look for that sound. And if you're in the woods looking for a bear and you don't find the bear, you go back to what you're doing. But you go looking for confirmation. If you don't get it, you go back to what you're doing. If you have an anxiety about something and you go to the internet looking for confirmation that your anxiety is justified, you will find some people who are going to show you something that says you're totally justified for being freaked out about this thing. You're totally justified in having this fear. And then you're going to start having conversations with them, and you're going to, some of those people, this is the iterative process, a small percentage of the large number of people doing that will find themselves talking to that group over and over again. They might end up meeting each other. They might end up going to conventions. They might end up getting on their specific dating apps that are only for that group of people. And now you're in a tribe. Now all the things that make you a primate are going to get thrown into this. And now you're in a conspiratorial community, right?
Totally.
So what I love about that process, to come back to the fact that this is just a reiteration of something we've been doing forever, but it's including a new category of people who were excluded from it. There are people who have all sorts of reasons to think. One of the central dogmas in flat Earth is that we sent up astronauts or cosmonauts, and they saw that the Earth was flat. And they were like, "Oh no, all of science is a lie!" And so they had to come down and create this mass conspiracy to hide it from us, right? And then it schisms out from there. And there are many schisms in the flat Earth community. Some people think it's a dome, like it's a snow globe that was created by aliens. Some people think it's one of many discs. There are all sorts of.
That's the one that you believe.
Yeah.
Right.
Tiny.
But
On the
what I
back
love
of a tortoise in space.
Yeah.
that's right. What I love about all those is that in their conception of what it might be, once you say you can't trust science at all, their conceptions of what it might be match up very almost completely one-to-one with all the ancient conceptions of what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And then since they don't trust science, they don't trust the institution of science, but they do want to test their hypotheses. They end up doing experiments to see if the Earth is flat or not that are identical to the experiments that people did when we first figured this out. And it's just time is a flat circle, right? This is what's happened. This is what happens when people who've been excluded from the conversation join the conversation. Some of them are going to have to go back through everything again. So to answer the first question you asked in a very long and rambling way, which is what I'm wont to do.
It's usually wrong.
Yeah,
you're amongst good company.
It's chaotic and weird. I get it. There's so many conspiracy theories, and all of a sudden UFOs are back, and flat Earth has conventions, and there are people who, based off of thinking that in a conspiratorial mindsets have led to things like QAnon and the insurrection and anti-vaxxing and all sorts of anti-masking. This is just what happens when everybody gets access to all the information at their fingertips,
awesome.
and has to go back through what was being done. It's just a reiteration of what people did forever ago. And there's that thing where people say, I can't believe it's 2021 and people are still X. Like I do not, that is not how I feel about things. Having written about this stuff and hung out with the people who study it for so long, I'm almost completely the inverse of that. I'm like, because we didn't discover vitamin C. We didn't like figure out what that was till like the 1930s. We didn't know how galaxies weren't like something that the average person understood till like well into the 20th century. Like I often think like um, I can't believe it's 2021 and we're not doing X is what it
Yeah.
usually how it feels to me because we just figured out almost everything that's common to our like everyday conversation. Like the three of us here having this conversation in 100 years ago, having a similar life, but 100 years ago, there's no way we'd have this kind of knowledge, these ideas, these philosophical concepts. We would not be able to navigate reality the way that we can navigate reality today.
Plus what you're saying, and the kind of 10,000-foot perspective that it gives on this everything that's going on, it affirms that it's happening, and it says no, this is part of nature, this is part of the natural process of humans potentially evolving in their ideas and arguments and thoughts and awareness, blah blah blah. And it's just nice because there's this, I like personally where I stand on the conspiracy theory conversation, but you're providing a missing piece for me, where on an emotional level I can accept and embrace that it's happening and that the conversation's happening with all of its ugliness and challenge and divisiveness. I think it's great, David.
Yeah, it's
What do you?
I oddly enough, it makes me feel optimistic. I
Yeah,
know
I feel the
it's a
same way.
it's a strange take, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
I appreciate the optimism because I am by nature moodier. Have a darker outlook.
You
But
don't see.
give me the floor, damn it. I because I came out of and still, man, like my accent is evangelical. Like if like my brain and my words are constantly being filtered through the evangelical culture that I grew up in, and and I don't know even how much my day-to-day thinking is still resolving that. Like I can't remember if I said it with Roddy or with you, but you and I have had a million conversations around shame. That is my like default mode of feeling. Like that's how I just feel about
Mhm.
myself, and it comes from childhood of being told that I'm no good. And it wasn't, I didn't have parents who were abusive. I grew up in a church culture that said you are no good and the only thing that makes you good is the blood of Jesus. And you had to like put that quarter in the machine and like hit the arm to get the things to spin, and hopefully you finally hit it that one time you said the right prayer or did the right thing, and jackpot, and the shame's gone. But for millions of us the shame never leaves. And
I hear you, man. I hear you. I grew up in the same sort of environment.
did you?
Hmm.
A
Yeah.
Southern Baptist, and the in fact, when I went to Westboro, and I wrote this in the book. The thing that I went there expecting all sorts of weird stuff,
Yeah.
but what I got was an experience that was identical to every single time I went to church when I was a kid.
Mm,
And so the thing that was most unsettling was that it was familiar,
right.
and that
Right.
the only thing Westboro has is a gimmick. They came up with
Yeah.
with signs and a way to like play with the media and manipulate. And they learned how to do a PR game, but otherwise it's just like any other Baptist church that's
Mm,
operating in the United States. The church that from my childhood probably agrees with everything Westboro has to say. But they just don't feel like they have the ability to say so openly without getting some sort of retribution from
yeah.
society. Westboro doesn't care. Like they figured out a way to, they went to the Supreme Court to argue their case. So they found a way to be openly bigoted in a way that
Yeah.
other parts of Southern Baptist culture are keep sort of in the shadows to prevent them from being ostracized. But that's yeah. I mean, I grew up in the same thing, man.
David, can I ask you a
Yeah.
question
Go
on
ahead.
that? So you've given your life over a significant portion to it, of it, to um, changing, understanding how minds change, how people change, how
Mm,
I'm assuming how you can change. You probably,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know.
Sure.
And if you empathize with what Ronald experienced, how has your, I'm assuming you put effort into changing that part of yourself. Uh, have you? How has that gone? What's that like?
can you give me some pointers to release that shame in my
Trying
life?
to wing my
I
boy
was
here.
I was washing dishes the other day. It was like, God damn it, this shame is like trying to sneak in.
Can't
Like
get the
just this,
shame off the
yeah.
fucking
Hmm.
plate.
My fingers can't get clean enough.
Yeah, I can help support us. In fact, if you want, we can even go through one of the techniques I learned from the experts. We can go
Oh,
through it
yeah,
bit
let's
by
do it.
bit.
Yeah.
I think let me give you some foundation first, because it's very important that everything is consensual and your agency is absolutely top priority, right? But
Hmm.
um, the way my personal uh, fall from grace or whatever you would call it came from I'll make this a really short story. I was strangely fortunate because my dad was a Vietnam vet, and he had, for reasons that he has never explained to me, he didn't like to go to church. But my mom did, and she felt like the pressure of the family wondering, how come, if you can't, your husband and your son can't both not go to church. So she was really wanting me to go. So we went, and I would go to vacation Bible school, and it was usually a nice lady who was showing us pictures from one of those little children's Bible books, and we were talking about Noah's Ark, and I just raised my hand and said, "How come all the animals didn't eat each other?" And her answer to that was, "We don't ask those questions." And then she moved on, and so I just felt embarrassed. I wasn't really. That was the only feeling I really had as a kid. It was my child mind just felt embarrassed for being told I can't ask questions. So I went home and told my dad what had happened, and his reaction to that was, "If you don't want to go back, you don't have to anymore." And I was like, "Hey, I just didn't want to take up my summers." So and so what happened was I was fortunate enough to be removed from the week to week of going to church, and that opened me up to other things. Then on the other side of that was probably this is probably not a good idea for your kids, but I was in a household where like there was no you could watch or listen to anything you wanted to, like rated R or whatever, watch it, and probably was exposed to a lot of stuff I shouldn't have been in an early age, but um, because of that, I got exposed to people like George Carlin and Bill Hicks and stuff like that when I was
Sense of humor.
really young, and and then that just opened me up to also being an only child in the Deep South. I had access to a lot of books and stuff, and my dad was a big hacker, so we went and got on. We were like one of the first families to get on the internet, so I was
Huh.
just exposed to a lot of
Wow.
stuff, exposed to a lot of challenging ideas, and that's how I got into it. But relating to like what you're talking about, this feeling of shame, this feeling of yeah, let's think about what that feeling really is, right? Like what would be the evolutionary why would this be a trait that is common to all human
Yeah.
brains? Why would it have not been selected out over
That's a great
time? Like what
question.
is it
Yeah.
what is the adaptive function of shame?
Hmm.
uh
Keep us
I
safe from something. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it before
Vague
I like
answer.
wax poetic.
Let me answer. I got this
You
one.
got it.
No, I mean, okay. If the adaptive function, so if I assume that most of the congregational outcomes of humanity is for the betterment of humanity. In other words, we survive and grow, right? Then there could possibly be a chemical mechanism within us that helps point to the things that aren't good for the whole, right? So if
Hmm.
I, hit my friend
Hmm.
and that's not good for the gander,
Hmm.
and I feel bad, like there's a physical chemical reaction of of a of a pain response in myself,
Hmm.
a kind of pain response.
For sure.
Yeah. And therefore it is like a barometer of sorts of like, is this good for me or is this good for the tribe, so to speak.
Right.
That's
But
my
sometimes it is
best
good
guess.
to hit the other person. I
Hmm.
mean,
Yeah,
in a protective way, you know?
yeah. And
Right.
then there's the shame of, I hit my friend when I was 7, and
Yeah.
that shame, and I said I was sorry, but his dad said I'm never allowed to play with him again. This is true, by the way. And um and then years later I think about that and still feel shame.
Exactly. Why it's
Yeah.
the question comes my mind is I get why, at least in very rough terms, and I can tell you've got cocked and loaded a much more nuanced like
No,
question.
I'm interested.
Thank,
I'm always interested to hear this answer. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
thanks for
Yeah.
kind of letting us hack it out here. but I can see pretty easily, I'm probably missing something, why shame would exist.
Yeah.
I'm more curious, why has the ability for it to be selected out more easily not part of our life? Like,
Mm.
why does it hang on like a bastard? Like, it seems so. One of the most intense experiences I have is, and mine isn't around a religion, it's usually around moving my body and kind of being humorous or dancing and then getting caught.
Mhm.
Someone see, I'm like being myself, and then someone sees me, surprisingly, and it's fucking intense, man.
Mm.
Mhm.
And I feel like I have awareness around it. Like,
Mhm.
why
Mm.
can't I just choose something else? That's why I don't understand, why don't we have that ability to choose when we know that shame is not serving us?
Mhm.
That's a great question, and a question that I talk to all kinds of people
Yeah.
about all the time. I mean, folks who are in every respect good citizens, right? Like they are our partners, they are parents, they are upstanding employees or business owners, and yet there's this constant specter of shame, that like there's a quiver full of reasons, like they are seeking the love and affection from their parents that they felt like they never got. um they got caught doing something as a kid that like just made an imprint, and they're still trying to make up for it. And it's almost like there's these certain feedback loops in our brains. The interesting thing though is, like, I think some cultures, and I heard this through another podcast with the writers of Ted Lasso, explaining that in the Netherlands, this feeling of shame is like is actively pruned out of conversations and relationships. So there's a
Like,
word for
ignored.
it. Yeah, there's a word for it. Like, oh, you're experiencing that thing.
Oh,
Don't worry about that thing. Like
Mhm.
it's like
does that allow them to not
it,
experience
it
it so
sounds like it
intensely?
more because it's a kind of a
Oh,
cultural, like, hey,
maybe it's just
together we're going to decide that this is not that fun to experience, and it kind of, like, blows the fun out of the party. So let's just forget about it.
less attention on it, kind of like
Yeah.
lets it. Anyways, okay, that's
The
our stab.
No, I like what you said. That reminded me of something. I might not be able to pull it up quickly enough. I went, oddly enough, when I debated a flat earther in Sweden,
Yeah.
and I was introduced to some of those ideas you're talking about for the first time there.
Uh,
And I was trying to remember. I think I took a note. This is my life. Yes, here it is. Um, the law of Jante. If you ever want to look it up,
Log John.
Jante. Uh, this is similar to what you're talking about. In Sweden, they have, yeah, they have culturally um, sacralized some concepts around when you,
Sacralized? What does that mean?
yeah, they've made it sacred
Oh,
to
just
not to
oh,
feel or not feel shame in certain situations.
that's amazing.
They've made it sacred. They've realigned what is and what is not important when it comes to how do we get along as a people, as a group, versus how do we express our individuality amongst the group in ways that North American society, so, United States society has sort of rebooted a lot of that just in the 1700s, and there's a real urge to be an individual at the expense of the group, and we're still having that
Mm.
tension today. Like, how do I be an incredible individual while at the same time also creating value for the collective? It's something that American society hasn't had as much experience with as some of these societies from the that
Is
region, the
is
Netherlands, Sweden, Iceland.
is part of the, I just really quick, I know you know a little bit, is
Yeah.
part of, uh, I'm thinking about that thing that you were saying about a lot of these conversations they're having where we got to go back in time. Like, I wonder, because now I'm thinking of shame more as
Oh yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
cultural,
yeah, yeah.
instead of it being everyone on earth is experiencing. It's like, okay,
Right,
pull the blinders off. You're part of a culture. Maybe it's up for that culture,
right.
up for this civilization as per the last 200,
I
2,000
think it
years.
it probably is in something, because the I can't remember if I said at the beginning of the conversation before David came on, or what, but it was the 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 phrase, gosh, what did I say earlier?
I don't listen to
Disintegration,
you when you talk. So.
dissolve, deconstruction. Deconstruction. The phrase deconstruction is very popular right now, especially
Hmm.
amongst evangelicals. You're I'm going to guess you're kind of like square in the middle, or at the beginning of the Gen X group, based on your
Uh,
dad. And
yeah, yeah. Born in '77,
okay,
so I
born
got to be
1980. I
right,
I
right in
just
the super Gen X stuff. Yes.
Okay. So I claim Gen X, even though it's debatable whether I am or not. I just prefer
Sure. Sure.
it.
You're on
But
the cusp.
I feel like Gen X. My sister's 10 years older than me. She was born in 1969. She didn't deconstruct her faith. She just was like, "Fuck that, I'm out, done." And then the generation, maybe my generation or the one just slightly after, thought, "Oh, wait a second, I've been harmed and I've been malaligned, and they have a whole list of things that they want to talk about, but they
Hmm.
also want to continue to have some kind of sacred practice or ritual in their life."
Hmm.
And that's where I think it's a little bit of a distinction between the previous generation. And but I think that's now up for grabs. It's like, well, we talked to Brenda Davis, we talked to Dr. Tracy Hunt. All these people are like, we are going to make some room for some mystery, and we are also going to unhook the shame we feel because of the cultural teachings that we receive through our religions in particular.
Well, it seemed,
Yeah.
and I know you were still in the middle of your answer. The You said that there's a lot of old, like, flat Earth conversations that are back up. They have to be revisited
Yeah.
currently.
Relitigated, I guess is a good way to put it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
That's a great way
I
to
just thought, I
describe it.
wondered
Yeah.
if the shame thing, maybe
It's
for our
exactly the same thing. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
exactly the same thing. Every idea we have of ourselves has a genealogy to it, right? I like to think of I'm right now I've been jamming out on this idea of articulating the ineffable, right? Um, we are all trying to put words to things that we're feeling that and language of any sort is a really low resolution way of understanding something.
yeah.
But and
Thank
so
you.
we need similes and metaphors and
Yeah,
stories.
awesome.
We need multiple ideas and poetry
Words.
and music. We have to do so many things to articulate, you know.
Yeah,
But once it's
awesome.
done, once someone has articulated it to a level of satisfaction, we can then take that and use it as a building block for a next level of articulation. So um, uh, there's philosophers like Immanuel Kant who like gave us words like angst, and that's it's not like people weren't feeling angst, but
Yeah.
once you have one word that is like a suitcase that you open up and all the clothes fly out of it, like it has all of the ideas associated with angst in
Yeah,
one little word, and we all agree that that's what that word means. I can now create sentences with the word angst in them that themselves will explore an even higher level of
Mm,
abstraction.
mm.
And then now I can condense that down into, once we all agree on what that sentence is, it could be a poem or a song we've all listened to. I can say it's like when Groundhog Day came out, and people can say, "This feels like I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day." Like that,
yeah,
just saying that requires that you've seen the movie and you understand it, and I can build upon that an even higher, like more complex concept. So that's articulating the ineffable. And as we do that, we get to higher and higher levels of abstraction. We can imagine really bonkers ideas. Um, but everyone is doing this at a different rate, and everyone is doing this at a different level of privilege. And one thing that we didn't have in your sister's generation was, you got to think of the media environment that she was exposed to. Like the this is where I would urge people to listen to read Marshall McLuhan's machine. I think it's called The Machines of Man. That's where the medium is the message comes from. Um, you can trace the history of uh, information technology upheavals, and with each one of those, you get a supreme upheaval in our understanding of ourselves, and so you get like you get the written word and the printing press. This monumentally changes how we are able to interact with one another and spread ideas around. But then you trace that all the way through. You get to radio, to television, to movie theaters, VCRs, and then eventually, you've got cable television, and then you hit the internet, and this is happening when you're in the middle of one of these, when things like you notice how decades don't really mean anything anymore, and
Yeah.
everybody's like, when was 1970? 30 years ago for everybody.
Yeah.
And then and then like if I would ask you, like, you remember the Harlem Shake, or Gangnam Style? Like,
Yeah.
if I would ask you, when was that? Like, what year was that? It just feels like it's in part of this blurry,
yeah,
amorphous nether thing, because we all got the internet round about
Yeah.
early 2000s, and once that happened, everything was available all the time, and the cultural demarcations of generations as like decades. Like you can think of music of the 90s, music of the 80s. There's a flavor to that. The music to the 70s, movies of the 60s. That was because when you moved into another decade and that stuff wasn't selling as well anymore, you go into a record store or a video store, and those weren't on the shelves, and they were in the collections of your siblings or your parents. And that's where you'd find it, but you had to move on to something new, and that stuff just sort of went into the memory hole until eventually the people who did remember it, they died. The people in the 30s were like, no, the good music goes pop 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 pop.
Yeah.
But they're gone. They
Yeah.
leave us. Nothing leaves us now. Like everything is part of the conversation. You might there might be something that happens in current like when that boat got stuck in the canal. Like there are people who would take that and throw it into the meme blender, and in meme space, you'd have memes going back to Star Wars, memes going back to The Godfather are being thrown into the conversation about this current event, and we're just in this big blur space, right?
Yeah.
So what I would imagine is happening, like in a evangelical uh, environment, is the same thing that happened when, if you were a hardcore fundamentalist Christian, when um, the planets were became established science, where you have to say like, hey, Jupiter is a thing, and the this is what the moon actually looks like. You have to incorporate that into your faith in a way that doesn't disturb the core values of the faith, the core truths of the faith. And then this gets harder and harder the more stuff we shovel into what we accept as true. And some things are still like on the verge of being accepted. Just evolution itself is something that in
Yeah.
some fundamentalist Christian communities is accepted, and others it's not, depending on how much they feel like there's a friction with their core values. Um, I would assume that's probably true of the difference between you and your sister, right? Like she, there were fewer challenging voices and challenging ideas and challenging elites during the time that she was establishing the fundamentals of her construct of reality than what you were experiencing when you were coming up. And now, if you're like a Zoomer, like the amount of inputs you're getting from around, like the level of critical thinking you have to apply to what is and is not true, based off of what's being presented to you on a day-to-day basis, is much higher than it was for us. I know people who are around about my age who only kind of just started getting online in the last couple of years, and I watched them making the same early mistakes where they believe everything and they
Yeah.
fall prey to stuff, and phishing attacks
Yeah.
work on them.
That's awesome.
I think that's
Totally.
also
Yeah.
true
Yeah. Yeah.
with faiths. I think
Yeah.
that's true with faiths as well as we move into it. Um, I will play with that technique with you in it, but I want to introduce an idea that can tie all that together that we've been talking about. It's called assimilation and accommodation.
Mm.
This is a very fundamental aspect of the psychology of knowledge, or the psychology of learning. Um, Assimilation and accommodation. So, as you grow up and as you learn things from your parents and your peers and your culture, it all sort of establishes the baseline of your reality, and then you will be confronted with new, novel information as you move through the world, new experiences, other voices telling you things. And at each point, when something is novel and ambiguous, you'll need to incorporate that novelty and disambiguate the ambiguous using your priors, as they say in philosophy. So your priors would just be your prior assumptions or the prior probabilities that you have established about what's going to happen. If I drop an egg on the ground, what's the probability that it's going to fly away and go into the clouds? You know that the probability is low, even if you're not thinking in numbers. You are thinking in the probabilistic terms of that's probably not going to do that. Uh, if it did do that, you'd be shocked, and you would have to uh, incorporate the fact that this has happened in some way. Um, Same thing is true for the your prior experiences with something. If every time you've ever um, tasted asparagus and made you go "Bleh," like that, you will assume that you're going to have the same experience the next time you taste it, right? So assimilation accommodation comes out of the work of Jean Piaget, who is famous for the experiments with children, with all that, where he was like, if I put water into this glass, if I take this very tall glass and I pour it into this very short glass, what's going to happen? And after there's a certain age where you're able to understand that just because it's tall doesn't mean it has more stuff in it. And he was charting all that because he's trying to understand the how knowledge structures form and build on each other in the mind as we grow older. Um, and out of it, he developed these terms: assimilation and accommodation. So here's the best way I could describe it: if you have a small child and you introduce them to a dog for the first time, and they ask what it is, and you say that's a dog, what's happening in their brain is something along the lines of they're creating a category, which is non-human, walks on four legs, has hair, dog. And then they see a horse
Wow.
and they'll point at the horse and go, look, dog.
That's awesome.
So what's happening is they are assimilating.
Yeah.
They're taking their current categorical understanding of reality and applying it to a piece of novel, ambiguous information. It's non-human. It's on all fours. It's got hair. Seems like it fits in the dog category. Dog. So they are assimilating.
Mhm.
And then when you say, no, 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 that's not a dog, that's a horse. This is a huge moment in the mind of a child. Like they really are expanding the perimeter of their consciousness because they have to add another category to subsume both the horse and the dog. Now they have to create a category of animal.
Yeah.
And there can be many different kinds of animals, right?
Yeah.
That's accommodation. So assimilation is what happens when you are confronted with challenging information, something that causes you to question your prior understanding of the world. And what you try to do is make it fit into
Yeah.
your current understanding.
Yeah.
Accommodation is what happens whenever you are challenged by something and you have to expand your understanding to accommodate this new information. And you can see this in evangelical groups all the time, but you also see it in political groups all the time. Anytime something where the motivation for you to believe it is about maintaining your reputation among trusted peers and
Right.
avoiding
Yeah.
shame, avoiding embarrassment, avoiding ostracism, keeping yourself looking at like a trustworthy member of that group, you will be really compelled to assimilate. So something comes along like dinosaurs, uh, and you're like,
Yeah.
I don't know, dinosaurs makes it seem like all the timelines of the Bible are. I don't be. You will need to come up with some way to assimilate it. And I've heard all sorts of things like those were put there by God to test our faith. And now I can believe in dinosaurs and also not disbelieve in is the core to my value structure, right? Because I've assimilated it. I basically said, look, that's a dog, as and if instead of a horse, right? And but sometimes to accommodate something, you have to turn the switches back all through your belief system and go, well, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. Or if it's a attitude, that's not good. That's not good. That's bad. That's bad. That's bad. And if it's a value, you have to alter where it goes in the hierarchy of what you think is more important than the other things. So this is something we're always doing at all times: assimilating and accommodating, assimilating and accommodating. And you can really see it in modern politics in the United States, because United States politics is sort of moved into the vacuum created by the secularization of our society. There's it is serving the function of a religious belief structure amongst people who are feeling that slipping through their fingers as something that
Wow.
binds them together as
Wow.
a culture.
As a side note to that, I've noticed that there's this movement I've seen amongst guys who do quote unquote men's work, uh, and they're doubling down on certain things with like that in particular. And one of the things I've seen is this new reverence to the Declaration of Independence, where got like you can buy it bound in leather. You can buy, it's like
Yeah,
it's this new, because we've lost religious um, points that we used to have, and now it's more secular, but we still have democracy. We have the United States of America, and that makes me feel like I belong.
And
I'm
how
a part of the tribe. Look at our founding document. Look at this one thing that's still
absolutely.
sacred. Yeah.
You keyed right in on it, right? Because that's what is the function of religion anyway? The function of religion is to bind people into groups toward group goals. It's
Mm,
to keep us all together. It's a binding structure.
yeah.
And in absence of it, we'll bind ourselves together using something else, because that's
Mm,
what we need.
so are
Religion sort of rides on top of these primate behavior systems, right? And that's what that brings us all the way back around to shame. Yes, I cannot believe I came back to it. Right?
you did
See,
it.
all of those feelings just reveal how much of a primate you are. It's
Yeah.
primate psychology. If shame, embarrassment, and everything that goes along with those, if we all feel it. There's no human in any culture that doesn't feel it.
A
at the
dog feels
base.
it.
Uh, well, dogs co-evolve with humans, right?
Yeah,
Dogs
yeah,
feel it, but cats don't. Lizards don't feel this.
yeah,
But dogs co-evolve with humans because they pick up on human cues to
yeah.
determine whether or not they should or shouldn't do something. So they feel some modicum of shame, but it's not nearly what we feel. And humans feel it in a way that's stronger than a chimpanzee or a bonobo
Huh.
or a great ape of some kind. So, but it's in all primates. And shame, all of those things key onto what the value of it is. You're trying to avoid being ostracized. You're trying
Yeah.
to avoid being put outside of the group to
Yep.
fend for yourself alone, because fending for yourself alone is death. I
Yeah.
mean, and pretty much all the way up until recently,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
especially in a Serengeti or jungle environment.
I'm going to
And
stop you right there because
yeah, go ahead.
I have to paint this picture that in my life that he's really described it perfectly. And and that was in my mid 20s after I experienced a breakup. I wrote my family a letter, my mother a letter saying, I'm out. I'm out of the family. I'm out of religion. I'm out. But then I through a series of weird events, I ended up back in the religious culture. And this time my status was much higher. And this time my status was, it fit my ego. My ego was like, oh, this is awesome. I fucking love this shit. And I maintained that status here in the town I live in, Portland, for a good while. And then it was was actually listening to an ex-evangelical named Rob Bell. Do you know who that guy is?
Mm-mm.
Interesting fellow. He was essentially kicked out of his own church because he questioned hell. A huge mega church in the early 2000s called Mars Hill in somewhere in Michigan. I'm listening to him talk to a monk named Richard Rohr, and Richard Rohr, who's kind of Catholic, he's kind of been kicked. Like, I don't know if the big capital church would accept him anymore, but he's definitely in the spectrum of spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking about Christianity and spirituality and how they really aren't. They're not in the middle of those things anymore. They're kind of beyond it all and like in the human experience. And it hit me so hard. Like it's like I can't live like this anymore. I can't continue to pretend I believe all these things and assimilate into this thing because I want to be accepted. And that was at the core of it. I
Yeah.
wanted to be accepted.
Oh,
And not only that, you just said it earlier, is you're going to get casted, you're going to get cast out of the group. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to die if you're outside the group.
Mm-hmm.
And that death for us evangelicals is not just death, it's forever death of the
It's
fires of hell.
that's a good point.
look. Sociologist Brooke Harrington told me
Yeah.
if there was a E equals MC square of social science, it is social death is greater than physical death.
Wow. Yeah.
If you are given an option between dying physically or dying socially, you will pick physical. If you feel guaranteed that social death is coming, there are many examples of this. Pretty much war is a pretty good example. People are more likely to die in war of avoiding embarrassment, avoiding shame, avoiding losing valor and honor. Then that's the propensity of like I want to be seen as a trusted member of my group.
Mm.
There right now people refusing to get vaccinated and willing to die because if they get the vaccine, what does it demonstrate to their trusted peers?
Yeah.
They'll be excommunicated just as you'll be excommunicated from a religion. Anytime the there's a possibility of social sanction and at the most extreme ostracism, and if you want to call it being excommunicated, even that's where you see people. That's where the people become most highly motivated to engage in certain behaviors.
Wow.
The same things you're talking about in uh, a fundamentalist church, you can see with like mask wearing, right? Like why, how did masks become politicized? Because the mask is a signal that you are a trusted member of your group or you're not. And it's the same, it has the same strength no matter which side of that you're on. If you're a hardcore uh, American Republican conservative, even if you're so far as to say that you're like in the Trump world, right? Wearing the mask shows that uh, you have you're violating the trust of your peers because they're saying that wearing the mask is not necessary. You're showing that you do not share their value system somehow.
Yeah.
On the other side, if you are in San Francisco right now and walking around maskless, just walking into restaurants and you don't care, like that shows that you have violated that value structure. So now it went from being, it doesn't matter what the facts of the matter are. what it serves, what's motivating people's behavior most is whether or not this is going to lead to them being shamed and ostracized by the groups that they consider themselves most tied to.
When you were talking about things coming into the well, I guess in the church or just in any large organization that has set values, a set sort of ideas of what you should and shouldn't do, whether they be moral, spiritual, physical,
Hmm.
and then things come in and happen, and then it causes things to get toggled off, or maybe assimilated or changed in some way. But I like the simplicity of just toggling
Turned
things off,
Yeah.
Um, are you? Do you think that shame, that there's a shame toggle that something has yet to or is coming in to start to tone that down for
No,
people?
no, I think we're stuck with that probably for we're stuck with that for at least
Awesome.
Sweet shame.
All right, there you go, Ron.
no, but we're stuck with that for a couple thousand years. But but that's okay. We're also stuck with
Really?
hunger. We're also stuck with hunger.
Yeah.
I'm also stuck with my foot's gonna hurt if I bang it against the if I bang my toe against the side of the couch. Like,
Shame's that important because that's one of the things that keeps us in the tribe and safe.
it's a primate thing, and we're primates, and we can't stop ourselves from being primates. So that's not the problem, right? The problem is not that we experience it. The problem is what it sort of self-talk and ideas and cultural concepts will form around that nucleus and become this larger concept. We are a biopsychosocial entity. So we have biological things that come, like we have proteins that DNA drives, and we have brain structures. There is a portion of our brain that is only devoted to recognizing faces. If you get into an accident or you have an aneurysm or something that damages that portion of the brain, you will no longer be able to recognize faces. It is biological. It is something that is created by your genes. Like, it is a portion of your brain that does this. And so our brains can have all these different structures that are devoted to certain things, and some of them are devoted to just learning, and some of them have baked in things that we will experience, that we can't not experience. They are things that are evolutionarily part of the substrate of humanity. But we're also psycho. So, which psycho meaning that we have minds, we have subjective realities, and the subjective reality that we move within is something that is developed through experience and through received wisdom. But we're also social, and that's where the primate stuff comes in. We are not only are our minds, our private, personal, subjective realities created by biology and by the idea space that we've built over time, but also the social space. We are a social creature, and that's where you take problems whatever culture you have inherited, whatever problems people were facing, sometimes 1,000 years ago, have momentum. They still have influence. Like, there's a great book. It's not a great book. I take that back. And I'm sorry I said that about you, Dov Cohen. Dov Cohen wrote a book that is readable. I wouldn't say it's great, but it has great ideas in it. You don't have to necessarily just because he's not a poet. Just because he's not a poet doesn't mean it's not a great book. But it's called The Southern Culture of Honor, and I mentioned it because it has this great experiment in it. Now, I come from the South, so this resonated pretty strongly with me. They did this great experiment where they had this hallway, and these people these men, they had some blood taken, and then they were supposed to fill out a questionnaire and take it to the end of a hallway. And the trick of the experiment is, in this narrow hallway, there was a door leading to like a lab, and they had an actor who was going to come through there. And right as you walk past, they wouldn't move for you, and you had to push by them. So you would have to shoulder bump them.
Yeah.
And when you shoulder bumped this dude, he would say to your face, "Asshole," and then walk past you.
Yeah.
And then you would go to the end of the hallway, and you would, at the end of the hallway, you get your blood taken a second time, and they would ask you some questions.
Yeah.
And what they found in the study was that they would ask people, "Hey, that guy that you bumped into, what do you think of that?" And these people were grouped into different groups by how much time they had spent living in the Deep South. And people that had lived a certain amount of time there, I think it was like 7 years or more, when they got well, let's say I'll start with the other group. People who had not lived in the Deep South, when they got shoulder bumped and they were asked, "How do you feel about this?" They were like, "I thought this guy was ridiculous. What a weirdo. Who cares?" And they looked at their blood from before and after, And before they had a certain level of cortisol and a certain level of testosterone, and after they had pretty much the same.
Mm.
But men who had spent a lot of time in the deep south, they asked them, how did you feel about it? They're like, I want to kill that man. Like, I want to go outside and duel him. Like
Yeah.
I can't believe this guy. Tell
Yeah.
me who this guy. Do you know this guy? Tell me where he's at. And
Yeah.
their blood before to after, they had like a 30 to 60% rise in cortisol and testosterone. They had been enraged to the point of physical violence. So biologically, two different things happened, even though we are fundamentally the same biologically, right? And in the psychology space, they had different ideas, they had different interpretations of what had happened to them, and they had different conclusions about what was going on. And then uh, all of these differences came from socially. They had parts of their biology had been altered by social constraints and social expectations. The culture, and where does that come from? It's insane to me where this comes from. But Bev Cohen's work shows that this is any culture that was a herding culture ends up being this. Let's take this outside kind of class of people, because herding cultures are cultures where your livelihood can be stolen. It's not like farming. If you had to deal with livestock and you had to deal with rustlers, how do you defend against that? You defend against that with a reputation for, if you cross this person, they will bring back retribution times 1,000 of whatever you did,
That's
and that prevents people from stealing your stuff.
Yeah.
But
it's funny
so you're
because
not a herding cult. I'm sorry, I'll finish
oh
this.
yeah, please, yeah.
You're not hurting stuff. Your family's not hurting stuff. When was the last? How far back does that go inside your culture? It goes back a pretty good ways, but the lag, the cultural lag, is what they call it, to you is so strong that you still will react in these
Yeah.
situations to the point that your biology will be changed by what you interpret as happening around you because of some problem that your culture faced a long time ago. And that's true across the board for a lot of things we experience, including shame.
I, I'll give you a perfect example of what he just described. And I said this to you the other day. When my father passed away, I inherited 30 firearms, right? And he's from West Texas. It was just part of our culture. I think I even have like one of the firearms, little collector's item, little pistol back there on the bookshelf. and and so part of my culture was like, a man keeps a gun in the house, protect the family. And and this was about 11 years ago when I first moved to downtown Portland, and I had a firearm kind of on the ready that was in my mind, my like insurance. And I remember hearing a sound. This is, going back to something you referenced earlier,
Hmm.
and my brain is putting together the monster.
Kill it.
Yeah, it's go time. And I get up. I don't find my firearm, but I get up to go investigate, and it's my child, right, who was at the time 3 years old. And I thought, fuck this. Like I
Hmm.
like when the phrase that came to my mind was, when you have a hammer, everything's a nail.
Hmm.
And I put my gun away. I moved it from where it was easily accessible to locked in a safe.
But that's
Yeah.
kind of almost a little bit of a different thing, right? Because that's almost proof. Well, I think I don't know, but it
Yeah,
sounds like there's some interesting things going on there. Like,
yeah,
for example, your dad. There seems to be a reduction in from one generation to the next in that blood response, or at least a conscious choice that you're making not to act on the blood response that you've had from generations. Do you know what I
And
mean there?
the fact that you have any metacognition really shows that, right? You're thinking about your thinking, whereas I
yeah,
would assume you go a few generations back, and this is just the way things are. There's no thinking as to why we would be this way. It's just
yeah,
the way we are, which is a good thing to know, because I bet there's about a billion things happening in your conscious experience right now that you still feel that's just the way things are, and you haven't engaged in
probably,
any kind of
yeah,
metacognition about.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah. God.
like the gun culture thing is a good example of that. If you've ever seen people with their like Christmas cards and the whole family's got a gun, and like certain portions of the
Huh.
country are like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? And other portions of the country are like, yeah, that's cool, right?
yeah,
And but the source of that, like the original like incepting like problem that culture faced, that it was trying to solve by creating norms, and those norms are leveraging certain primate aspects of ourselves. This gets lost to the point that it just becomes normal to us and unquestionable. Like the all primates experience shame when they feel like they're doing something that is causing them to look like they're not a good member of the group.
Mm,
But what is classified as being a good member of the
yeah.
group is different from
Yeah.
culture to
Yeah.
culture.
And we get confused as hell because like we'll just be wrong. Like my shame response is just wrong.
Oh, to dancing, to getting caught
To
dancing.
the things that I'm
Yeah.
shameful about, it's fucking wrong. Like it's actually
It is wrong when you dance sometimes. I've seen it.
shut
It's
up,
like
man.
pretty.
That was not cool.
He's actually a really good dancer.
Just kidding. No, it's like if that shame response is to keep us connected somehow, it's doing the opposite for me. It's keeping me from connection. It's keeping me from from creating new relationships, from having new experiences that are really positive, you know?
Yeah.
And I know I think we're doing a pretty good job of like we've got some conversations going. I'm really curious to your own as I was asking before, your own experience around maybe deconstructing and having some conscious agency over not feeling these strong emotional responses, shameful responses, but um, potentially I'd like to share something around
Yeah.
around my
Yeah.
experience because
Yeah.
I've experienced a success recently
Okay.
that I'm wondering if you could you might see like, oh yeah, this is what's going on, where I'm just kind of like hacking away blindly and going by intuition, intuition alone. And that's that I realized recently that I'll get shamed getting caught doing things, um, but that I value when I'm around kids supporting their ability to make mistakes, to do so while being watched, to not feel criticized, judged, anything. I think it's important to be able to do those things not only by yourself but also be observed. So that's always a nice little moment for me to discover how to support someone else, whether it's a kid or not, being in that experimental place where they're just playing.
Mm.
And so what I noticed for me, I tried to do that and I tried to do it in front of me and I get this strong emotional response every time. And it's just like, this isn't decreasing. Like maybe it will over decades and maybe I just need to be more patient. Fair enough. But what I've noticed, and I don't know, I can't remember exactly why I made this decision, but I realized, oh, if I just get good at the thing, then I don't mind getting caught. And also, I don't mind making mistakes.
Hmm.
And at first I was like, well, you shouldn't have to be good at something to be playful with it, you know, but that's just something I need to do. And I don't know why that is, David, but it has helped me with this experience around shame and to be more myself in front of people and
Yeah.
spontaneously and more playful is I have needed to commit to these few things that I care about in life around music and around dance and, you know, around a couple other things that don't really matter. But yeah, and I'm just curious. It's working for me, but it also feels like I'm cheating a little bit. You know? Like you shouldn't have to do that, but I just do.
I don't think there's any different than lifting weights or paying attention to what you eat. Like you're hacking your biology. 'Cause at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're hacking these these uh, these emotions and motivations and predilections that at some level are coming from neurons, and then that have been shaped over time by cultural influences.
Hmm.
So to uh, to purposely, mindfully, uh, and with both responsibility and ownership of what you're doing, uh, alter these things through practice and alter these things through conversations and through testing the waters and
Yeah, yeah,
playing.
yeah.
It's no different than picking up something heavy over and over again until your body changes in response to it. You are hacking yourself on purpose using your volition.
Mm.
What a
Uh,
tricky
That's
thing
cool.
to not
That's pretty
realize
interesting.
that though,
Yeah.
and to have it takes decades to. It's just so simple, you know. When I put
Mm.
that way, and when I arrive to it, I'm like, oh yeah, you just need to give these things quality attention and get stronger. Like,
Absolutely.
I've been going
Yeah.
into the weight room and being like, God, I fucking suck at lifting weights. It's like, dude, pull some plates off, man. Like, you can't do it, you know? Why
Yeah,
am
yeah.
I embarrassed? Because I'm sitting over here hurting myself, like
But that's
trying
a
to.
great question. But that is a great question to ask yourself. Like, why am I embarrassed? Because who what is the audience to whom I feel this is going to possibly cost me something if they don't like it? Like, and they get as deep into that as you can get. Like, who are the people that I feel beholden to, and how would they react to it? And then test the waters of doing something that you're scared of doing because of these feelings. Uh, and with and if and test who who judges you harshly, who doesn't judge you harshly, and start to recalibrate who you feel beholden to and whose trust matters to you.
Is that part of the recipe of those rare circumstances that help people change? Is that what you've experienced around some
Oh
of
man,
your
it's
work?
humongous. Like the people who left Westboro Baptist Church, for example. Most of the time they left the church not because they disagreed with their um, sort of their core values toward LGBT people, right? They usually left the church for something petty or something seemingly petty to us. It was sometimes it was dress codes. One person I know that left, he had hurt his back, and they didn't allow him to go to the doctor. And but these were cracks that let in the light. Like these were things that they were like he had been going to school to be a nurse, and he knew a better way of taking care of his back than praying it away. Um, this for Megan, who famously left the church, she had been exposed to kind people who were willing to talk to her without shaming her about what she believed, and had found a few things within the scripture that she had questioned on her own, and they validated her for questioning it. And this was the crack that led in the light to questioning more and more things. Same thing with Zach, who hurt his back. He was like, if I don't agree with this means it's possible that they're wrong about other stuff, and it
Yeah.
starts to this starts to erode because you're like, it's not completely unquestionable. And then this usually is what happens. That's the incremental. There's sort of a tipping point to it, but it starts small like that. And what will happen is, for everyone I've seen leave a conspiratorial community or a religious community or something like that, they usually get to a point where they feel like their values are not aligned with the value of the group, and they attempt to change the group. It's similar to assimilation and accommodation, but they're doing it at the group level. They're like, can I get the group to change so that they share my values and I don't have to leave them? And they'll present their case often. And if the group is amenable to it, that's usually what leads to a schism. That's how you get denominations.
Yeah.
But if the group's not amenable to it, if they will oftentimes stay in if there's no social safety net for them to fall into. But what happens is they will, even with other knowledge, start looking for other groups of people who are more amenable to their value sets. And if they can get enough of them, there will be a moment where they are like, I can't change this group, but I can go to these people who accept me for who I am. I'll go there. And this will happen over and over again throughout your life, because that group, over time, you might start changing and feeling like they don't match your values. And eventually you'll find your comfort spot, right? But that's usually what happens, is that people attempt to change the group they're in, and if it doesn't work out for them, they start looking for an escape hatch. And if they're lucky, some people never get an escape hatch, but if they're lucky, they escape to something that's better for them. Something that makes them feel more like their authentic self.
Are you in the middle of any of these schisms personally, or?
Oh man, this is my whole life, right? Like, actually, in writing this book was a big. Writing How Minds Change was a big deal, because like I I didn't realize this was going to be the arc of the book until deep into it, but I
It's
had
the 9/11 guy, and then I think I read this though, but you had an idea for it, and then somebody changed their mind, and it kind of blew your mind. Is
it.
that kind of what you're
Yeah,
saying?
I used to give lectures where I would say, people would ask like, "Hey, my dad's thinks Barack Obama is a secret Muslim Kenyan reptile. Like, what do I do about that?"
Oh, he's not?
Hold on, I have something to go do. I would say in those lectures, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't change his mind. I was in that camp,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And a portion of my audience were the sort of in the big S skeptics community, or the humanists, secular humanist groups, and
Mm.
um, there's a lot of I know this is not an acceptable term of art anymore, but there's a lot of douchebaggery in those groups.
We're into that phrase.
We are.
Okay, cool.
I've been using it, and lately.
Okay,
I've been
I don't know if it's
stop.
okay to use it, and I'm totally okay with not using it anymore. But there's
That was the last one.
Right.
Salt.
But there's a
Mine's
I was I was so um, locked into this idea that humans are flawed and irrational,
Yeah.
and you could explain a lot of stuff because of that.
Mm.
But as I started to work on this book, I started meeting people who had changed their minds just straight up. Like they had been told, "Hey, that's not true," and they're like, "I didn't think about that way." And I was like, "Okay, that goes against what I've been telling people."
Yeah.
I saw people leaving conspiratorial communities by research, doing their own research, or being influenced by other people. I started to see persuasion. I was like, persuasion totally works. I went out with the leadership lab in California. They go door to door and just knock on doors and change people's minds in 20 minutes about wedge issues like transgender bathroom laws and abortion and stuff like that. And then I met the people in street epistemology who approach people on the street and challenge their deeply held beliefs about just about anything, and they can in roughly 20 minutes cause people to flip their certainty on all sorts of things. And most of all, I met Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber, who showed me that humans are not flawed and irrational. They're biased and lazy, which is different. And it's very rational to commit confirmation bias. It's very rational to commit all the biases I've ever written about. But there's nothing irrational about if you go to look for your keys, go look for them in your kitchen before you get in the car and drive to some other town like that. Like you should try to confirm your hypothesis first instead of disconfirm it. And there's a reason that doesn't work very well for scientific principles, but it works well for the kind of day-to-day stuff we do, right? But the biggest thing was seeing that we're lazy and biased instead of flawed and rational because reasoning. I had sort of been enchanted by the concept of human reason, the philosophical idea of logic and rationality and propositions, and this is the way towards truth and the eternal. Um, but human reasoning is not that. Reasoning is just coming up with reasons. It's just coming up with reasons for what you think, feel, and believe that are justifiable and plausible for other people to around you, and they would be like, "Oh, that seemed like a reasonable thing to think and feel and do." Once I got into that space, I had to accept that I'm going to have to say in this book, "Hey, I'm sorry about all the stuff that I've been telling you, but I think I was wrong about a pretty good bit of it. And here's the story of how." And
Awesome.
and I think the biggest moment came at the. I learned a bunch of persuasion techniques in doing this, and I went to this retreat in northern in north of Montreal. There were 40 of us were invited to give lectures at this sort of like camp in the woods. But they had like this lodge, and they had a big telescope there and a planetarium, and it was great. Like we had campfires, and then we gave lectures. It was a cool experience. And I had just come back from Sweden, and I'd just given a lecture. I just used one of these persuasion techniques with Mark Sargent, who's sort of the most famous flat earther. And I had talked about this a lot when we were all hanging out, but it wasn't in my lecture that I gave. I gave a lecture about this card study that demonstrates sort of the assimilation and accommodation. And everyone just kept asking about, let me see the technique, let me see the technique. And I was like, well, how about maybe, I don't know, it's weird to go through it. You're all cool people and we're all getting to know each other. It feels weird to question your core beliefs with a persuasion technique. But we had one night we were all having dinner and they had it was like a cafeteria kind of thing. And one of the people that I had spent a lot of time talking to about all this, he said, I would like to see the technique. And so I had my notebooks and I was like, okay, we'll do it. And as we were talking, people started gathering around us, and eventually it was the whole place was there, all 40 people. But so when I started up, I was like, okay, what is a core belief? Something that you have. It could be a belief or an attitude, but it'd be easier if we use a belief, or a value. But beliefs are much easier. Something that sort of guides your thinking every day, and something you're willing to question here with me right now. And he said, "Well, I believe in God." I was like, oh, "Man, like that's the one I didn't. That's the one you just the don't do that one."
Yeah.
He's like,
Why
"Sure."
not? Because you think it'll work and it'll be intense.
That also, I just feel like there's nothing more core. There's was one of the most core things you can believe, and plus we were all being very friendly, and this introduces something that could be like, I don't know where this is going to go.
Yeah.
So I said, sure. And so the way it went, and here's the short version of the story. I said, okay, on a scale from 0 to 100, how certain are you that God exists right now? And he said, I'm probably 80, but sometimes higher, sometimes lower. I said, was there a period of time in your life when you weren't an 80, some other number? He goes, yeah, it used to be 0. And I was like, oh, okay, well, how did you go from 0 to 80? And these are all elements of this persuasive technique, by the way. These are this sort of line of
Yeah.
questioning. And he said, "Well, I'll tell you a story, but I usually only tell a story once a year, but I'll tell it to you here today." And so he told me the story where
Huh.
he had went to the Holy Land uh, to destroy his faith. He was really wanted to become an atheist, and he uh, he had m- he had worked in a record store. He had met someone who kept coming in who used to be in the military and was now a mercenary and went back and forth to the Holy Land doing odd jobs. And he was thinking he'd like to be a photographer. The This person I was talking to wanted to be a photographer, and he said this would be a chance to take some really cool photographs. So but also, what I'm really going to go is to use this as a way to get into the Holy Land and talk to some spiritual leaders. So he goes there, and he kind of gets what he wants out of it. He goes from temple to temple, talking to people who have, some of them even have like original documents and stuff. And everywhere he went, he felt like, like they, he felt like they felt very televangelist-y to him, and he was like getting confirmation of what he went there to get confirmation of, especially when they started telling him like, for $1,000 American, I'll show you like the finger bones of Jesus.
Striding toward
He's like, "Ah,"
$1,000.
yeah, and he's just like,
Yeah.
he was like, "Fuck these people," and he was
atheists
like,
for free. This is great.
"Yeah, he's worth it." But he's at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he was having this experience of like, "Yeah, I got what I wanted," and he walked out, and he heard someone moaning and crying, and this was at a period of time when the sun is just setting, and a lot of these like priest types are going out to do their thing, and he walks around the side of this giant cathedral-like building, and he in one of the alcoves, he finds there's a young woman in a pool of blood and vomit, and she's dying, and he goes and asks her what if he can help her. She has a suicide note. He showed me the note. It's still covered in blood. Um, and he doesn't understand the language very well. He doesn't know what really what's going on. But he picks her up, cradles her in his arms, and starts running through these cobblestone streets of this ancient city with the sun setting, and just begging for help from anyone. And he gets a taxi, takes her to a hospital, and they pump her stomach, and he stays by her side this whole time. Eventually, the family arrives. Eventually, there are people who can translate. She had a little notebook with her that had numbers. He just called them one at a time until he found their family. And she had she recently just broken up with a boyfriend. They were from slightly different schisms of the faith, and they didn't like it. And she tried to kill herself. And through what he did, he saved her life. And she went on to become a nurse and has a family, and they stay in touch. And he's gone to have to have these great big meals with uh, both her and her family and the bigger family.
So
And he
when he
told
tells that story,
that's the story, right? And he said that whatever uh, you think of when you use the word God, whatever that word is a definition for in your mind. For him, it was for that moment. And if there is something holy, he experienced it. And because of that, he went to the Holy Land to destroy his faith. But what he did is he ended up gaining a faith that was all his own.
Mhm.
And so he's telling me a story. And I mean, we have tears. It is powerful. Like the way I'm telling the story, it doesn't even come close to the magnitude of what it felt like to be in that space. Plus, there are people all around us, and they're very leaned in. And there's a real heaviness in the air. It's a very pregnant moment with this. We're very the emotions are very high, and I knew what came next in the this technique, and I had a real confidence that if I went through the rest of it, I could probably take some of this away from him. But I felt, what's the good of it? And what is the good of that in this moment? Because I feel like I've gained more from this conversation than I could ever uh, steal from him. And I said, look, if I took out a little if I took had a little box with a button in it with glass over it, and I put it in front of you, And when you open the glass and press the button, you'd go from an 80 back down to 0. Would you press the button? And he paused for what felt like 45 minutes. I'm sure it was just like 15 seconds, but it was the longest pause I've ever experienced in my life. And he said no. And I said, then I think we're done here. I can't imagine why we would continue this conversation. And thank you for telling me your story. And I closed up my notebook, and I remember one of the people there, he just went, ah, and then we all hugged. Everyone, that a 40-person hug. And I feel like, given my reputation as what I do, and what I've told people, as things that I've put out there in podcasts and books and stuff like that, um, I had changed so much through my experience of exploring these spaces that I felt like that was the right move there. And I was deeply changed by that experience and by the experiences leading up to it, but I didn't know it until I was tested. And I was given this ability to use persuasion, I think, through writing this book. And I had never really asked myself, when and where should this be used? And I think there was a previous version of me that would have just bulldozed right through that. I'd been like, haha, what do you think you are? You think that was God? But that's not the point, right? What he did was something that is of the highest caliber of what a human being can do. And it really demonstrates the awe and the yearning we have for transcending our primate selves to something bigger than that was fulfilled by his experience. And I don't care what he labels it, and I don't care if what he labels it is not what I would label it. Wasn't the point of that conversation. So yeah, that changed me a lot.
Dude, that's an amazing story.
It seems to me that we are, and I don't know this, but it's just a feeling that I've had, that we're all play more of a creative role in our lives than maybe at least the society I grew up in, and the sort of zeitgeist of the world now, that we know. Like, we have more of a say in what happens. And some of your work seems to point to that. But also, we were speaking before you came on about paradox and holding opposites. And I think that there's that scientific phrase you've probably heard: the universe is not only stranger than we think, it's stranger than we can think.
Hmm.
That'd probably be a good one to put in on your little process that the process that you developed. But let's say that's true, then I don't know what's going on, you know. And I suspect that Ron and your and me and everyone else's reality is both a center in itself of a potentially a universe or whatever, and a role in mine. I'm a center too. Like, how can you have more than one center? It's like ancient Native Americans saying that the place where center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. It's kind of, Campbell talked about that in one of
No,
his
that's
talks.
good. I like that a lot.
Well, if that's true, to me, that story you just told is like this mysterious, powerful respect of someone else's, even though they are a player in your life potentially. This is my way I see things. It's not to say this is how you feel about it. Even though that they are a player in your life, someone around your center, they're also a center in the creator in and of themselves potentially. And in the way I see life, that just was a moment of true respect, seeing respect, spectacle, like you saw, you gave distance, and you let it be, and you said, we don't need to flip that toggle. And like that's
Which I gotta say like too, man, like that's in a lot of ways, and I don't know if I'm not trying to like stroke your ego here, David.
No.
I think that what you said, your comment about him is like in a lot of ways that's the pinnacle of human experience, what he did. But so is what you did, which was to respect his stance and respect his experience, and not needing to prove a point. You didn't need to be intellectually superior. In fact, um, you understood the gift of empathy, stated or unstated, and that connection that was then shared with the hug, which, by the way, I felt, right, even as you're telling the story, and like my tears are welling up in my eyes. Like I wanted to be a part of that hug and did feel a part of that hug. And are you familiar with any writing by C.S. Lewis?
Yeah.
Have you read the Last Battle? It's the last book in the Chronicles of
Uh,
Narnia.
I I have read that, but I read it when I was very young, and I don't remember much. But I do remember reading it. Yes.
Well, there's a character like you in it, and the character says basically that there's an apocalypse, and Aslan is like choosing who gets to make it, and one of the characters is devoted to his path, but his heart is always in a really good position, but it's an opposition culturally to what the culture that Aslan was supposed to be a part of, supposedly a part of. And the guy's like, "Oh, I guess I'm not going to make it in because I didn't, I wasn't a follower of you."
That's awesome.
And he's like, "No, you were actually. Every time you did something good, essentially, like you were actually in cahoots with me." I'm obviously paraphrasing this.
See, this is something that's very close to my heart, and it's up in my life, and I think in the world now pertains to so many of the discussions and divisiveness that's going on, and that's that the word. There's a lot of words flying around.
Mm.
And when someone uses some words that are counter to what I believe or my meanings of those words, there's a conflict. It would be really nice if people just saw, you know what, I know you're using words that I don't agree with, I find offensive, blah blah blah, but I see your inner world is aligned. I see your heart.
Yeah.
These are weak words around it, but I see that your intention. I see who you are.
Yeah.
You're not hurtful. You care. And I really wish, and I don't know how to be a proponent of this other than hacking my way through building some articulation around it. But I really wish
Articulating the ineffable, baby. Let's do it.
it's just like, see, that happened the other night. I said something offensive to somebody because David, I'm valuing right now. I need to be free. I need to explore. I need to make mistakes. I need to be able to be okay, reaching out there and taking my shitty first flaps of flight, in so many words and ideas and conversations. And to be able to have someone hawking, over me, like they're ready to dive on me. It's just like, fuck off, I'm doing something good. And we were in an experience that the actual story doesn't matter, but someone was like, they attached to a word I said, and I was like, whoa, look at behind the word. I got your back. I'm here. And there was like, no, hell no. And it just breaks my heart. And I don't know if you
I feel you very strongly on this. That led to me having a different. I'm still disassembling this experience, right? I'm still disassembling the experience of putting all this together. Because I went into trying to write. I wanted to write a book that was on the ground. I wanted to have first person experiences, and I did not expect to change my own mind. I didn't expect to change through that experience. I thought I would go in and say, like, here's how the world works, and here's another book about things that you. Here's another book that's basically Wikipedia with jokes. But and I didn't expect this sort of thing. And then when you have an experience like that, you go on a walkabout to try to understand it, and you start being very open to other voices helping you understand it. Like just listening to you talk about it with me now, like I feel how your take on everything and what you're saying about my place in it. Like I can feel being deeply affected by just this conversation in a way that the previous version of me was so cut off from that sort of experience. And um, I brought some of this to like a negotiation expert who told me, you know, debates have winners and losers, and nobody wants to be a loser. And the only person who gains anything from winning a debate is the person who learns nothing. And the better framing for something like this is let's have a conversation and let's treat this like a mystery we're trying to solve. And we'll collaborate on trying to understand it. So all of a sudden, the argumentative framework takes on a completely different patina. Uh, if we're discussing an issue that we have different perspectives on, I can treat it as if we have different perspectives and neither one of us has the total perspective, which is a different way of it's not like debating where I need to show that I'm right and you're wrong, and you need to show that you're right and that I'm wrong. That's a different construction. So if instead I'm thinking like, we're back to back and you're looking this way and I'm looking this way, and the only way that we can understand what's actually happening, to have a real perspective on the world around us, is if we enter a state of trust where we share what we're each seeing, and we take from each person's perspective and add to this bigger worldview. That is the gift of this ability to communicate with one another. This is why we have all of this. And it just so happens we're in a state where the ways we're communicating with one another, like over this kind of medium, is much easier. But if you get on something like, say, Facebook or Twitter, it's very difficult to have that kind of conversation with someone. It's just the way that that platform was constructed that limits your ability to have that kind of interaction. And but we have the ability to do this. Like, it is available to us, and you can feel yourself snap into it when it's working correctly.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're going to be okay if we can, like, model our virtual environments and our strange media to match more closely to the humanity that's waiting to embrace it. It's just that we are making kind of crappy versions of it right now. We have to keep working on it, and and it's the same is true for all these other old institutions that we're watching crumble around us. Workplaces don't seem to work. Like, after COVID, we're all looking at workplaces and going, "Do we really have to do it that way?" Politics, this kind of information ecosystem feels like, do we really have to do it that way? There's a lot of that happening, and I feel like interpersonal communication can gain from it. And men, especially with all the baggage that we carry with us from cultural expectations, have been the ability to collaborate and work together and be open and introspective and have actual emotions and not feel that threat of being shamed for just feeling things is so new. This is something that is really just, like, the 3 generation spread of Zoomers, millennials, Zoomers, Generation X. Like, we're the first dudes in a long time that have the opportunity to support one another, um, pick and choose from the buffet of masculinity what works for us, um, to have fulfilling real relationships with romantic partners, and to the I think in and to even, like, I come from a culture like in the deep South, like, nobody goes to therapy. In the United States, therapy is men we're looked down upon for therapy in a lot of ways, and just the access to be mindful of your own self in that way. These are new things that require this mix of assimilation and accommodation, and I can feel the newness of our own humanity in a way that I'd never noticed before, and a lot of that came out of um, really, really saying, like, maybe I was wrong about a lot of stuff. And once you know you're wrong about anything, it opens you up to being wrong about everything, which is nice because there's something on the other side of that, right?
It's
Yeah.
exactly what we were talking about
You
before
got to
we
be
came on.
brave.
That's great. Yeah.
Because where's the solid ground?
Mm.
You know? Well, you got
Paradox.
to have solid. This whole
Yeah.
we could fucking go up on that.
Yeah, Dave, we're a bit over an hour together. How you doing on time? You okay? You need to go?
I'm good. I can. What do I got?
I
What
think
time
we
is it?
booked 2 1-hour sessions, and we got about 10 minutes before the second one ends.
Hey, I'm with you for 10 more minutes. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I not.
Well, should we do the
Yeah,
technique you're
that's what I
talking
was
about
thinking.
of
Oh, the technique.
okay, yeah, noticing
That would be
fit.
awesome.
Yeah.
Ron's like, I need.
I
ditch
need
the
this right
shame.
now. Come on, man.
Sure, sure, sure.
Don't leave me hanging.
Let me. I'll start. I'll start by telling you this term of art called surf pad, and then I'll get into make the other thing make more sense. Surf pad is something that came out of. You remember the dress that was all over the internet in 2015? Some people saw it as black and blue, and other people saw it as yellow and
Yeah.
or white and gold.
Yeah.
I bet the researchers who, like, studied that to try to get an idea of what was going on there. And if you see the dress, you'll see it as one thing or the other, and you have no choice in the matter. Is how you will see it. But some people do see it differently than you, and that's kind of weird, right? But they also have no choice but to see it that way. Turns out the reason people see it that way is they the more time you've spent in bright light, in sunlight, the more time you've spent in sunlight, or the more you work around windows or something, you'll see it one way. And if you or spend more time in artificial light, you'll see it the other way. The reason for that is, unbeknownst to you and without your knowledge or consent, uh, when something is overexposed, the brain will subtract the luminance. That's what they call it in neuroscience. The brain will turn the brightness down on an overexposed image, whether you're seeing it through your eye, through nakedly through the eyes, or something that's in a photograph or on a computer screen. And and the reason for that, and there's all sorts of hypotheses for this, is it's most likely so that I can see the benefit of it out in the natural world. Like you want to be able to see the fruit or the blood or the danger or the thing or the hole or whatever. Like you want overexposed things to not be so overexposed. So the brain does a little bit of photoshopping without telling you about it. And so your subjective experience is not the objective reality of the thing. It's whatever happens after the end of that process takes place. And you the thing about when something is overexposed, how you subtract the illuminate depends on how much experience you've had with that particular kind of overexposure. So people who spend more time around sunlight, they've seen more things be exposed in blue light because there's more blue wavelengths in the sky, and people who've been around a lot of artificial light, things are mostly exposed in yellow. So what happens is people who spend more artificial light will subtract the yellow and they get black and blue. People who spend more time in sunlight will subtract the blue and they get yellow and gold. And what you find that correlates perfectly. They had like 15,000 subjects, and the more time, if they were early risers, they saw the dress one way. If they were night owls, they saw the dress the other way. Now, this is a hugely important lesson for all of us, I feel, because the way you have no control over which way you see it. You just see it the way you see it, but your life experiences determine how you see it. And if you were to get into an argument with someone and say, no, it's black and blue, and the other person's like, no, it's yellow and gold, and you came to the point where you're like, imagine creating a culture around it. Imagine creating a religion around the way you see it.
Yeah.
It's unquestionable. How can anyone possibly see this differently?
That's
But
that parable of the God walking one way and then he turns around to the trickster, right?
This is it maps. I love it because it's neuroscience and it maps onto so many beautiful poetic metaphors for this concept. And if I were to get into an argument with you as to which way it should be seen, and you were trying to win that argument, neither one of us would have access to the higher truth of the matter, which is we see it differently because of all this brain stuff. Like that would just be off the table if we entered into a debate.
Yeah.
So that being said, persuasion is. Let me preface this by saying persuasion is not coercion. Coercion means the other person doesn't know what's going on, and you're stealing some of their agency away. Persuasion requires that everybody's on board with what's going on, and I'm going to say out loud, like, I hope to persuade you of this. Would you like to engage in an attempt for me to persuade you of something? So that's important when it comes to these techniques.
You have my consent.
Can I put a quick pause on it real quick?
Yeah.
I think that you were actually talking about the technique that he uses to deconstruct the shame conversation, and we've got another technique that he was talking about around persuasion.
Oh yeah, sure.
Am I off?
I may have
I was
misunderstood.
talking about shame. That's what I was talking about.
Okay, never mind. We'll talk about persuasion techniques.
I'm sorry to do that.
We'll have to.
No, it's totally cool.
This is important.
Part two with you at some point in the future. Yeah.
Get this great book called How Minds Change. Comes out soon. If you want persuasion techniques.
Give us the name of the author.
I will say, if you, without having to go into those techniques in depth, if you start any conversation from the viewpoint of, if you communicate to the other person, you should be ashamed for thinking, feeling, or doing whatever it is you're talking about. There's no way you will ever persuade them of anything. If that is what's communicated up front, conversation's over. Related to shame, right? That's how powerful shame is. So you want to talk about deconstructing shame? Well, I would let me switch gears into something.
Yeah, I'm sorry for doing that.
No, it's totally cool. Let's see something more like in the vein of motivational interviewing. Okay, if I were to put on my psychologist hat, which I am not a psychologist. I went to school for that and abandoned it for journalism. So all I have is a bunch of podcast experience. But I do spend time with these people a lot, and I know that, like, if we're going to explore it, if we're going to deconstruct it, I think the most important thing is to say, in when in recent memory, in like the last 6 weeks, can you remember a time that you felt sort of a visceral response to shame/guilt?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Last night when I smoked too much weed and went on a werewolf food bender afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
At what point did you notice did you notice that shame was taking place? Did you notice that it was part of your subjective experience?
Probably when I had eaten my first snack and then was full and was in pain, but decided to make another snack.
Okay.
And that was the moment I was like, this is not good.
before that, did you have any? Do you have any of these feelings at all?
Yeah,
Before,
if we could use the scale, like the 1 to 100, um, there was the shame was like 10 or 15, like anticipatory shame of like I know what I'm about to do, and like maybe I can talk myself out of it.
yeah,
Yeah, but I couldn't. And the funny thing is, I actually have to recant saying too high. It wasn't like stoned out of my mind. It was just like I had the munchies,
Yeah.
and the munchies. My I know that cannabis turns off the switch in the brain that tells you you're full. So that's when the shame was started to kick in. Cannabis does not turn off the shame switch, unfortunately. Me.
right. It could make it worse.
Yeah.
Um, and then after, when you had the second snack, on a scale of 1 to 10, how high would you say you were on the shame?
Pretty high. Yeah, like 70 or 80, because it was accompanied by like actual pain. The
Got it.
pain of being too full, and
Okay.
the
Here's a nice here's a
embarrassment of
nice
that. Yeah.
here's a nice tricky psychology question.
Okay.
If it was, let's say it was 70, uh, why wasn't it higher?
Because I've probably numbed myself to the routine of munchies and eating, you know, pretty frequently, and also because I'm not obese. Like I've actually lost a lot of weight in my life,
Hmm.
and I'm in kind of in fighting weight right now. Like
Yeah.
I don't. It's it. Yeah, like that. I know it could be way worse, and
Yeah.
I create a rationalism, a rational the reasons.
Yeah.
Well, I don't
Just
feel so bad.
justifications.
Yeah, justifications because I'm not.
Well, let's look at those
Yeah,
justifications. Like in this company, myself and you
yeah.
included, like in this room, I don't feel like you should be ashamed for that. Do you feel like you should be ashamed of that?
Me?
Yeah.
Not we've talked about it. Hell no.
Yeah. So okay.
Yeah,
Well, no one here thinks you should be ashamed.
yeah,
Um, I'm also thinking like it could have been higher. You could have been up to 90, you could have been 100, but you weren't there because you could, in your self-talk, you're saying, I do take care of myself. I'm aware of what this is doing. I don't eat like this all the time. If I'm hearing you correctly, these are
yeah,
things you're saying. I've also demonstrated that I can lose weight. I can take care of myself, and I'm aware of that as well. I should be proud of myself for that. I also know why I'm doing this. It's not because I'm some sort of glutton. It's not because I'm a bad
yeah.
person. It's because I'm under the influence of a drug, and I also know that I took the drug and that it's okay. I've done this in the past. These all this self talk seems
Yeah.
to indicate to me that um, this self talk is not just keeping you up from being higher than 70. It feels like 70 is not exactly the number you should be at. If this self talk is true, do you
Mhm.
trust the self talk? Do you think that what you said, these things are true?
It's funny. That's a great question. I trust the self talk in practice, right? As a principle. Like I would say that, like you shouldn't feel bad for yourself, and I would feel completely um, convicted of that
Hmm.
statement to Daniel.
Hmm.
But to myself, there's still this like your conversation with the a scientist on anxiety,
Hmm.
about our brain being stuck in those same loops over and
Hmm.
over, um, and I think my default mode is that. So my brain's
Hmm.
wanting to go back to it, and
But I
I'm
think he's talking about the self-talk of, well, I'm not overweight. That the self-talk you told him is the reasons and why it's
oh
not higher. Do you
uh,
trust that? Is that
that
right?
well
That's
Yeah.
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 Do
I
you
mean,
trust that self-talk?
I like that's the part I don't entirely trust
Hmm.
is I know that there's still some part of this like a broken foundational messaging in my brain
Hmm.
that is trying to elevate the shame despite the good right reasons to not feel it
Hmm.
is the tension between the two. And
Yeah.
I started getting really curious about that curious thing that your guest had talked about with anxiety, like getting curious about the sensation of it. I started doing that with this a long time ago, and that's what finally um, like made me realize what was going on. I was like, oh, that's my little brain, my little monkey brain trying to go back to what it knows.
That's right.
Yeah.
And for anyone listening, that's Judd Brewer, and his book is Unwinding Anxiety. And
Yeah.
these are incredible lessons to uh, for any, I lost 100 pounds too.
Oh, that's amazing. Well done, man.
Right, half of it before COVID, and half after. So I understand those feelings you're talking about. I get those same feelings eating anything.
Mm,
And Judd Brewer was very helpful in all this.
mm.
Because if you had a diet book, all diet books can just be one page, and they could just be like, eat
Yeah,
less,
that's right.
exercise more. Like, that's it, right? That's it.
Yeah.
But that's not it, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you eat less and exercise more? How do you do these things? You need That's psychology, and psychology is behavior. Psychology is social influences. Psychology is all sorts of things. I l- I would urge you and challenge you to investigate. You have some self talk that is in conflict with some other self talk,
Mhm.
and there's some self talk is keeping you from being above 70, um, and some other self talk is pushing it up to 70. But when you think about it, when you metacognate about it, what I'm noticing from what you're telling me is that you're aware that these shame feelings are coming from an audience member that seems to be that you didn't invite to the party. Um, so who is this audience?
Mm.
Who is this? Who is the audience to whom you feel the shame? Like, it's not us.
Thing
So it's got
brought
to be
you.
some other party.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm imagining you could probably investigate, like, imagine yourself in different company, and who is the company that you could imagine who would be like, yeah, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Mhm. Mhm.
Though this is the influence that you will need to focus on to, like, deconstruct where the shame comes from and how to, like, you get that number down from 70. Because I would ask you, what other opinions might they have about you that you would disagree with?
There's a psychologist named Robert A. Jordan who wrote a book called Inner Work, and he talks about active imagination, where you would take, not as art, not as your writing,
Yeah.
but you would ask the question. He just said, make character out of it. Out of
Mhm.
both of those people, maybe there's more than one version of each one, and then you have a conversation when you put them in an environment. Have you heard of this guy in this work?
I haven't heard of him, but I've heard of this technique. Yes.
There's a
Is that
similar
something that
technique. Yeah.
you
Yeah, because you're being. Um, I mean, well, I know better than to put words to put thoughts in your head. I would task you to imagine, the the people to whom you feel, or to the ideas to whom you feel beholden here. What are some other aspects of your life that they would disapprove of? And would you change those aspects of your life to seek their approval?
Mhm.
I would think
oh
probably no. And if that's true, it will affect this feeling of shame in other places too. And because you're really starting to self-author, as they say. You're starting to say, well, this is, um, the my friend Will Storr, who wrote a great book called, he wrote a lot of great books. He's one of my he's we have a nice gentleman rivalry, and um, he said, he did a lot of work into personality research. Certain aspects of personality are pretty unchangeable. They're like, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion,
Mm.
agreeableness, neuroticism. Uh, we have a certain we have a certain knob setting and all of those. But aware of all of that, he talked about a lizard that, on an iceberg, is very uncomfortable and may think that that's because there's something wrong with them.
mm,
But that lizard in the desert feels nice and comfy and realizes that it's fine. And it's because it didn't change itself, it changed its environment.
Mhm.
And in changing its environment, it did change portions of its inner self. So oftentimes, moving into a different environment of people who share your values, and people who share the things you feel are important goals to reach for,
Yeah.
and react to the world with a certain emotional quality that you find is amenable to how you would like to react to the world and grow into. Um, when you surround yourself by that, whether physically or just in the imagination of being surrounded by an audience of those sorts of people, you will find that things that used to feel shameful will feel less so, and things that used to feel unshameful will feel more so. And you will find yourself growing into the true value system that will bring to you what you're looking for, what it is that you want to be, what you want to
Yeah.
become, the path that you want to be on. And I think
yeah
that even eating that little bit of extra food after taking a sick bong rip is a it's a portal to that, right? Nothing is uh, absent this there's nothing that is outside of the space of opportunities to discover yourself. And I think this is just one more way of doing so.
Man, yeah, man, this is a really fun conversation.
For sure. I loved every aspect of this.
I took a lot of notes today.
The only thing we didn't talk about was the only thing we thought we would, which is meaning. And it sounds like it was a meaningful conversation.
Yeah,
so
we had a very meaningful.
Without talking about the meaning.
When did your book come out?
June or July of next year.
June, July. Awesome. Okay, man.
Man, David, I hope it sounds like it worked all right for you. Thank you.
I love it. I love having an opportunity to talk. Every conversation that you leave feeling like you gained something, like we all leveled up a little bit. Like I heard the Final Fantasy music at some point. Like we all it's a good conversation.
I would love to speak to you someday more. I hope that happens. If not, just thank you for being a part of our path. You know.
Hey, thank you, and reach out to me anytime. And you know, you got all of my stuff to reach out to me, and same to the audience. I'm very easily accessible. DavidMcRaney.com and you'renotsosmart.com. You find all my stuff there.
I really appreciate it, David. Thank you, man.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
All right, man. See you later.
Field dressing. Thank you so much. The end of the portion of a recorded episode of Cutting for Sign. We had David McRaney on today. And
mine was so spun out, you can't remember his name.
Gosh, that was powerful. That was a really, really powerful. That was a very powerful talk. I'm really glad we had that. I mean, David's background is he's a journalist and a writer, author, who's written a couple titles on.
Can't see you.
Oh, here we go. How about that? Yeah. David, let me make sure that this is okay.
He is a big mind. He's a big mind, and he's a big heart.
Yeah, you know the introduction that you read about him that said he had. In fact, I'm going to reread it really quickly because it was so good, and I don't know who found this out about him or what it was, but it was. He is known for his quick sense of humor, compassionate heart, keen curiosity. Has been described as a self-delusion expert and psychology nerd whose mind is expansive, surprising, and big-hearted. And all of those things came out in spades. In spades, man. Like his. It's so easy to be an intellectual and to kind of shit on everyone's ideas and actually be pretty good at it. And I think right now, I think right now in this point in history, like we love that shit. We love it when someone can come in with good rational thought and just sniper someone's arguments or their vision or view of what reality is and just cut it to shreds. And he has that capacity. He's in an intellectual sense, he had like his hands or his brain should be labeled as a lethal weapon, right? But he is compassionate. He's really compassionate, and I think that is actually the thing that like is the most human part of us, when we're the best part of humanity. You know, when we can see each other for what we, despite ourselves.
That those two things, and it's more nuanced than that,
Yeah.
right? But those two things coming together, I would say, is we're getting closer to like
well said.
Compassion's great. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Intellect's great, you know. But those two things coming together and bringing the other little things that aspects of humanity, intuition. I don't really go into like the other little things that might make that up, because the point is just it's the coming together of several aspects of being human, and that that dude does that, and you can see it in his body language. You can hear it in his word. He has the word. He doesn't just feel it. He knows how to communicate it. He obviously values communicating it. You know, that's an outlier. You know, that's a lot of different things that come together. Any one of which would be valued. And pretty cool to see in someone. You see someone really smart. You see someone who's really articulate. You see another person who's got a good heart. You see another person who values people, like coming together and communicating and changing. But when you get all those things to wrap up in one person, and then that person be doing the thing, that something that equals all that, and you're with that for a long time, that's when you get an international best-selling author. There's a reason why people all over the world reading his stuff, And I just that was something else. For him to come and spend time with two assholes in Portland is just like, you know what I mean? It's like, well, I know we're doing a good thing and people are getting into it, but fuck, man.
Well, that's that's the
2 hours of that fool's time.
That's the gift. There is the first thing that we spoke about. The very first thing that we talked on is his optimism about humanity right now. And that's not something you hear very often right now. Like that someone feels good about the way humanity is going.
Well, I would challenge that. I wouldn't say that that's not something that you hear very often. You do if you listen to it.
Yeah, it's
there.
there. It's
depends
there.
on what you want to tune in.
But it's not what sells news, and it's not what sells.
I don't know. Maybe it is. I mean, I hear you. I don't mean to like push you on that.
Yeah,
I get it. It's just that maybe it can.
It certainly can. It definitely can. But the murder in downtown Portland is going to get more viewers than two guys like decide to agree to disagree and hug it out.
Depends on how it depends on how it's said, how it's presented, and you know what I mean. Like people are thirsty for that. I'm thirsty for it.
Totally.
Hey,
yeah.
I'm a person. I'm valuable.
I'm very thirsty for it.
I am not interested disproportionately in the murder.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not to say I'm not interested.
Yeah.
It's just that that has its place, and it wouldn't become my whole world. And murder maybe isn't even the best example because that is news, and that's news that should be said. It's like maybe with something that's a little bit more like clickbaity and roping you into a story that's not really a story, but it seems negative to get your emotions up.
Yeah.
I'm not interested, and I'm really interested in some of the stories that David told us today because they brought us both to tears, and like they brought him to tears. He was getting emotional.
I know. I know.
Remember you told me when we started, and I don't think that this would be rude, but you were like, he's kind of like Spock. Spock cried on the show today. And he didn't cry. I don't.
I sensed a tear. I was like, tear over on the other side. Yeah.
It's like to see a heart, on display.
A true heart.
With a brain that's sitting right by it. It's just like I'll never stop being fascinated by that.
I agree. I completely agree. I am inspired to continue to have more curious conversations with as many people as I can. And especially when those conversations feel like I've got something at stake, and bringing curiosity around why I think I have something at stake. What sacred thing I need to hold on to.
Yeah.
Why does that feel like life or death to me? Not trying to persuade the other person, but why do I feel so strongly about that? And is that something that I could potentially loosen my grip on a bit?
And I loved his image of when he was talking about how people argue, and then they if they're not really trying to reach a ground or willing to change and be changed by the conversation, then they're not really conversing. And when he was saying that, I was thinking an image that came to my mind. There's two people facing themselves to potentially arguing.
Yeah.
And then that body, like the body position changing to side by side looking out. And then when I was thinking about that, he used back to back. It was like,
oh, interesting. Yeah.
It's two people who are like looking out on the world and then kind of having each other's back. And I just think changing the positions that we, of that little metaphor, it really is indicative of change of mind, of position, of intention, of like ability to agree, of willingness.
Yeah.
It's trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's huge.
It's huge.
And
huge.
then to see him actually do it and be changed, and then say he was changed by us.
I mean, your question to him about, are you going through your own interpersonal change, or was there some stance that you had and that you are now switching? I thought that was a genius question, number one. So well done on that one. And then, he's got a whole series on genius. I don't know if you'll fit in that.
I'll go find if it was actually genius. I'll watch it 6 hours.
A little hyperbole, okay? Allow me some sprinkles in the language.
Hyperbole,
okay.
Man. Keep it to the insults, not to the compliments. It makes me very uncomfortable.
I was gonna insult you. I just said
thank you.
Didn't think you were.
Make me feel much better.
but his authenticity around saying, look, my latest book that's coming out was about how dumb we are. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he's saying, but it's, I realized I needed to change my stance as I'm writing the book. And so that's what the book is about, is how people change their minds and why they change their minds.
Awesome. And then he had to do that to he isn't that's cutting for something.
Oh,
That's
big time.
like
Big time,
I'm gonna write a book on how people can change, and I think
Yeah.
it's rare. I don't think it happens. And then one of the first people he interviews is someone who is, I believe they were like a 9/11
Truther,
truth or
whatever.
whatever
Yeah.
it is. I don't
Yeah,
know much about that, but I know it was like a firm stance on something.
Yeah.
And in talking to him in the interview, this person changed their mind, and he was like, I thought you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And he had to like scrap his idea and go back and
Oh man.
write a different book
and
change himself.
Yeah, I want to figure out some way we can keep having conversations with David, because that was one of those life-giving conversations that I came out of the other side feeling smarter, more equipped, energized, proud to have had it, glad to have had it, and now I want more.
I'm glad that he ended up getting to the shame exercise.
Oh yeah, and he also helped me, walk back out of a shame cycle that I was stuck in around something that
it's easy to say, but
it is easy to say.
What work would you do around that privately? I mean, what would that look
That's a good question. I mean, a couple of the things that I was writing down was who the audience is, because that's something I've always had is shame around who I think is judging me, and sometimes I think that's a person that I know.
Really?
Yeah, and only to realize like that person's not paying attention at all, right? And then, and which was a big reason, and this goes back, if you listen to the episode, like if you go back and listen to my religious experience, like that was, I was afraid of the shame I received from the religious culture I was a part of. And now it's more like, that instance in particular, it was about, because I'm a non-drinker, but I do smoke weed and I do other drugs occasionally. And so for that in particular, the audience is someone I know that is a teetotaler, right? Like they're completely and 100% sober. I'm not even I'm not, and the funny thing is I'm not even really friends with them anymore. Like we don't talk. Yeah. We don't share things anymore.
They're a character in your,
but they are a character in my brain. And I think an old version of me when I first stopped drinking, which was like that, like everything's off the table, total complete sobriety, straight edge kind of living, is still kind of like, hey asshole, like I remember when we were all, we were completely off of everything and didn't do anything. And even David's conversation of like he cutely said like a sick bong rip, and I was laughing because he was referring to my marijuana consumption, and my sick bong rip is like a tiny little puff off of a pin, but the weight of it feels like what he just said. But the real shame was around my munchies, eating unconsciously, which I don't, talking out loud. Even this morning, the reality is like I was joking about with Morgan this morning, and I can't remember exactly what I said. Something about I went full werewolf last night, and because I left the kitchen kind of a mess, and she just laughed and I laughed, and so a lot of the shit was already gone. But I thought that was a good, great example for this conversation to come around to. I loved it. I thought it was a great conversation, and I will keep doing it. Yeah,
bringing humor around that is, I think, is a great way to. I mean, can shame really exist?
Yeah,
where there's genuine humor too. I don't know, like. If you make a joke about something and you're really laughing, you're laughing with someone else, who, by the way, like the fact that you can tell your wife about something that you feel really shamed about and that you do privately, that you could easily hide. Or if you knew how to clean up the kitchen, you could hide. But the fact that you do that and you have a partner who can be like, see that and support it and laugh with you about it, that's already, I would think, just hanging on to that idea would bring that 70 that you said you experienced. It would just take the edge off of it.
It did.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and for folks who are just joining us here live on Instagram and Facebook, this is the end of a 2-hour conversation that we had with an author and journalist. David McRaney, who's he's a smart guy. He's a very smart guy, and he's a very empathetic human being as well. And he helped me walk out of a self-perception that was mostly shame around a real incident in my life last night. Smoking a little weed and eating a lot of food till the point where I hurt really bad, and I had to stay up. I had to stay up an extra hour to stop hurting before I went to bed. And I think that was part of the removal of the shame too, is just living with the consequences of indigestion after powering through a bag of granola.
I hear you. I told you some of the epic stories of when I was struggling with that aspect of myself. You know what? It might be good to revisit because I did get out of that, and it's one of the things that I did change. I mean, he's talking about. I love that part. I think it was in the little bio or intro that, and someone else, I just pieced other bios together, but it talked about the rare circumstances, and I think there was another adjective too. I can't remember what it was. That caused a mind to change. And I think they caused a mind to change not incrementally. Minds can change incrementally.
Sure. Or sometimes quickly.
Well, sometimes they fucking go.
Yeah.
And I had one of those around food too. And
oh, really?
Definitely, man. You've read it. I wrote that story about it. But I just think that there's these weird jujitsu. We talk about that. Little moves that one can make that have usually to do with acceptance.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I know how to do this. It was a miracle. It was rare.
Yeah.
And it happened one morning for me where I just decided, because mine was what do you call it? It was a body dysmorphia.
Right.
And so I see myself as fat, lean as hell. But it was very real. And it's scary.
Yeah.
Because then everything you eat is just going to make you look worse.
Yeah.
Every bite you take.
Wow.
And so one day I decided to be the fat guy. I'm serious.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
I remember that.
I was like, well, fuck it. I'm just going to be fat because I really want to eat a couple of breakfast burritos this morning. And my body needed it.
Yeah.
And something about that, man, caused change. It was like a half spontaneous statement that I made to myself. It's about 15 years ago. And I know that's not it's not like you could just say that. Yours is its own nuanced little thing. But I wonder if you're closer to finding that.
I've been accepting myself more in this space because in a lot of ways cannabis has been really helpful in extrapolating thoughts. I've been able to go deeper into my mind with the help of cannabis around certain things.
Yeah.
And I have to then go, well, okay, one of the consequences of this is that it suppresses the signal in my brain that tells me I'm full. So am I willing to take that risk? Right.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
right. So
sure.
and I've got some parameters that it's fine. I can normally just have a nice walk with my dog, go to bed. And and that is generally what happens. But then every once in a while I'll go, I'll get that werewolf hunger that is insatiable, that has led me to epic food vendors. I even ate an MRE once that we were saving for the big one. The meals ready to eat by the military. It's like emergency rations. I was home alone. This was a couple years ago, and home alone. No one was around. Confession time. And I hadn't done any grocery shopping because I hate grocery shopping. And the house was generally empty of food. And there was an MRE, a military bag of food, in the back of a closet somewhere.
There's all kinds of stuff in that, because some of that has to just do with dude, learn to go shop. Not learn, but you know what I mean. I don't want to say anything
totally.
About it, but
yeah.
God, because we've all been there. I don't want to go shopping. Fuck that. What's in the house? You dug deep. You went into the bedroom closet.
It wasn't the bedroom closet. It was the weird cabinet above the refrigerator in the back, behind the dishes that you never use. The nice wine glass or whatever. Hey, we gotta go. This was awesome, man. Daniel, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us over here. Take care. And goodbye, Facebook.
Facebook too. What's on Facebook? I've never been live on Facebook.
There you go.
Everything else.